You think you know how to spot a trap? Think again. These aren't just booby traps or tripwires. These are the weird ones. The ones that mess with your brain, flip logic upside down, and use your own thoughts against you. Some will make you laugh, some will frustrate you, and a few will haunt your sleep. For the next 3 hours, we're diving deep into the strangest mental, verbal, visual, and psychological traps ever designed. And trust me, escaping isn't about being smart. It's about thinking differently. Let's get weird. But before that, drop a quick comment and let us know where you're watching this from and what time it is for you. It's amazing how we're all connected. Each of us chasing that perfect night's sleep. If this resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Restwise, and join the journey. Paradox traps. You ever been in a situation where no matter what choice you make, you lose? Like, both options seem valid, but somehow they cancel each other out and leave you stuck in the worst possible way. That right there is the dark magic of a paradox trap. It's the kind of trap that doesn't just mess with your body or your eyes. It breaks your logic, snaps your reasoning in half, and leaves you standing still while everything around you collapses. Paradox traps are some of the nastiest, most brain-breaking traps out there because they don't rely on brute force or flashy distractions. They hit you where it hurts most, your decision-making. They take something that seems like a simple puzzle or choice and twist it just enough to make every possible move feel wrong. You don't get caught because you're slow or unskilled. You get caught because your own brain folds in on itself, trying to make sense of a situation that's designed to never make sense. Think about the classic 2 doors scenario. One door leads to safety, the other, instant death. But there's a catch: one guard always lies, and the other always tells the truth. You can only ask one question. Sounds solvable, right? But a paradox trap would flip the script. What if both guards are lying this time? Or they don't even know the answer themselves, but they think they do. Suddenly the logic you're counting on to survive just crumbles. You're left paralyzed, overthinking every detail, and time's running out. That's the thing. Paradox traps don't have to be physically dangerous to be deadly. They weaponize hesitation. While you're caught in an infinite feedback loop of what if, the actual threat. Maybe it's a closing wall or a rising floor of spikes, is getting closer. It's not just a trap. It's a psychological chokehold. One brutal example: the choose to stay or go loop. The room you're in is filling with gas. There's a door, but a sign says, "Opening this will release gas faster." Now you're trapped in a moral dilemma. Do you risk opening it and possibly speeding up your own demise? Or stay put and suffocate slowly? But what if the sign is lying? Or what if it's true but the gas stops if the door opens? Either way, you're frozen. Not because of a lock or a wall, but because the situation is intentionally built to break your ability to choose. Paradox traps mess with something called cognitive dissonance. That's the mental discomfort you feel when you try to hold 2 contradictory beliefs at the same time. Your brain wants consistency, clean logic, but a paradox shatters that. It creates tension you can't resolve, which is exactly what makes these traps so effective. You want to move, but your brain keeps slamming the brakes. There's another version that's even more vicious: the win-lose paradox. Let's say you're told the only way out is to lose, so you throw the challenge. But then the system says you lost on purpose so you don't win. So then you try to win and it says, "You won, so you lose." See where this is going? Every outcome cancels itself out. You try to beat it with cleverness, but cleverness becomes the thing that damns you. It's a trap that punishes thought itself. And it gets worse when you add layers. Some paradox traps use recursive logic, where solving one piece opens another, but that piece contradicts the first. It's like a digital maze made of riddles that all point in opposite directions. No matter which way you go, it loops you back to the start, but with less time and more pressure. Every step forward starts to feel like a mistake, and that psychological weight just keeps building. It's not just hypothetical either. There are real-world games, puzzles, even escape rooms that simulate paradox traps to mess with your head. And guess what? People freeze up. They panic. They start yelling at each other. Not because the trap is physically hard, but because their ability to make a confident decision completely collapses. And that's the whole point. Paradox traps strip away certainty until all that's left is anxiety. And once you fall into that trap, it follows you. Even after it's over, you start second-guessing everything. Every choice feels like a setup. You begin to hesitate in moments where you should act. The trap doesn't just end when you escape. It rewires your confidence, poisons your logic, and makes you fear the next decision even more than the last. That's the scariest thing about paradox traps. They don't just trap you in a room. They trap you inside your own mind. Self-referential traps. You ever get stuck thinking about something that keeps circling back to itself, like no matter how many times you try to solve it, you end up right where you started? That's not just a brain cramp. That's the start of a self-referential trap. And once you fall into one, it's like being pulled into a psychological black hole. The more you try to escape, the deeper you sink. These traps are evil in a quiet way. They don't throw spikes at you or drop the floor out from under your feet. No, they whisper. They suggest. They hand you a riddle that sounds simple, and then slowly rearrange your understanding of it until nothing makes sense anymore. A self-referential trap is basically a puzzle that refers back to itself in a loop. And that loop, that's where your sanity starts to slip. Let's say you walk into a room and there's a screen that says, "The sentence below is true." You look down and the next line says, "The sentence above is false." Your brain stutters. One of them has to be wrong, right? But whichever one you try to believe, the other contradicts it. That's a self-referential paradox. And when a trap uses that to guide your actions, say, whether to press a button, flip a switch, or choose a door, it becomes a nightmare. See, your brain doesn't like open loops. It wants closure. It wants things to fit together neatly. That's part of a psychological principle called the closure problem. When you're stuck in a self-referencing loop, your brain keeps cycling, trying to finish a pattern that has no real end. It's like chasing your own shadow. And in a trap, that's deadly. Because while your mind is spinning in circles trying to decode the contradiction, the clock is ticking, or the room is filling with water, or the wall behind you is inching forward. Here's one that'll make you question everything. Imagine a door with a sign that says, "Only people who do not read signs may pass through." If you read the sign, you're disqualified. But if you don't read it, how do you know? It's a trap that cancels itself out. You're not stuck because the door is locked. You're stuck because your awareness of the rule makes it impossible to follow. That's the essence of a self-referential trap. The moment you become aware of the logic, you lose. And that's where it messes with your sense of control. In most traps, you fail because you misstep. But in these, just understanding the trap can trigger the failure. It's the intellectual equivalent of touching a wire just by looking at it. There's another flavor of this that's even more twisted. Traps that make your next move depend on your knowledge of the trap itself. For example, a room where you have to say a code word aloud, but only if you're not sure what the code word is. The moment you feel confident it's wrong. The moment you doubt yourself, you're actually right. So what happens? You hesitate, you overthink. And the trap's already won. Self-referential traps take your ability to think clearly and flip it inside out. They create mental landmines where trying to reason your way through actually works against you. You think you're being clever, but cleverness becomes the thing that gets you caught. You start trying to outthink the system, but the system was designed to collapse under its own weight. That's the point. And once you're in it, everything becomes suspect. Every clue, every line of text, every instruction starts to feel like it might be referring back to itself. You start questioning whether you're solving a puzzle or if the puzzle is using you to solve itself. That spiral. That's how these traps devour your focus. What makes them even more dangerous is that they don't just end when you leave the room. The after effect is real. People who've dealt with recursive, self-referential logic puzzles in high-stress environments report lingering confusion, even paranoia. Because once your brain gets burned by circular reasoning, it starts seeing it everywhere. You hesitate in real life. You start second-guessing instructions, simple decisions, even your own thoughts. That's the real cost of a self-referential trap. It doesn't break your body. It breaks your trust in your own mind. So yeah, sometimes the scariest traps aren't the ones with saws and spikes. They're the ones that sit quietly, watching you try to untangle a knot that ties itself tighter every time you think you've found the answer. Time loop traps ever get that weird feeling like you've done something before? Not just déjà vu, but the full-on experience of living a moment again. Same steps, same choices, same outcome. Now imagine that happening not just once, but over and over and over again. Welcome to the nightmare of a time loop trap. At first, it doesn't even feel like a trap. It might even feel like a second chance. You mess up, you die, and bam, you're back at the beginning. You remember what you did wrong, so you fix it. Nice, right? But then you fix it again. And again. And again. And it still doesn't work. That's when it hits you. This isn't a second chance. It's a prison disguised as progress. Time loop traps are brutal because they don't punish you for failure. They punish you for trying. No matter what you do, the outcome resets. It gives you the illusion of control. Like if you just make the right move, you'll finally escape. But the truth is, you're being conditioned. Every loop teaches you something new, but that new knowledge only leads you to a new dead end. And here's the terrifying part. Your memory becomes the weapon. Most traps rely on physical danger. This one relies on repetition until your brain starts to erode. You remember every death, every bad choice, every friend you failed to save, every door that didn't open. Eventually, it's not the trap that breaks you. It's the weight of your own experience. That constant, nagging feeling that nothing you do matters because the clock will always snap back to zero. Psychologists have actually studied this kind of thing in the form of learned helplessness. When people, or animals, are exposed to repeated situations they can't escape from, they eventually stop trying. Even if a real escape route opens up later, they just sit there, trapped by their own expectations. That's what a time loop trap is aiming for, to grind your hope down until even freedom feels fake. Let's say you're trapped in a burning room. You try the left door. Flames, dead, reset. You try the window. Blocked, dead, reset. You try smashing the floorboards. Collapse, dead, reset. Maybe you spend 100 loops searching every inch of that space. You memorize every sound, every flicker of flame, every tick of the clock, and in loop 243, you finally break through a secret door, only to find yourself right back at the start again. Because that was the test. The trap wasn't about the room. It was about how long you'd keep fighting before you snapped. And once the loops start messing with your perception of time, things get even worse. You might think you've been stuck for an hour when it's been days. Or you feel like you've been trapped for weeks, but it's only been seconds. That distortion messes with your internal clock, your motivation, your ability to think clearly. Sleep, hunger, pain, none of it matters anymore. Just the loop, just the endless reset. And the longer it lasts, the more it stops feeling like a test and starts feeling like your new reality. One of the most vicious variations, when you finally escape, but you can't tell if you really did. You walk through the final door. The room is different. The clock is ticking. But deep down, part of you doesn't believe it. You hesitate. You wait. You brace for the reset, because your brain has been rewired to expect the worst. That paranoia, that hesitation, that's part of the trap too. And sometimes, the loop doesn't just affect you. Sometimes the other people in it start changing too. Maybe they remember things they shouldn't. Maybe they react differently each time. Or maybe they never change, and you're the only one evolving, screaming at NPCs who don't even know they're trapped. That isolation, that slow unraveling of your sense of connection to anything real, that's psychological torture on another level. What makes time loop traps so horrifying is that they exploit the part of you that wants to improve. The part of you that says, next time I'll do better. They use your drive, your memory, your logic, all the things that make you human, against you. They don't kill you in a blaze of gore. They kill you in pieces, loop by loop, until you're just a ghost replaying choices that never mattered in the first place. And even if you do escape, can you ever trust time again? Infinite loop traps. There's a special kind of trap that doesn't kill you, doesn't chase you, doesn't even scare you at first. It just goes on. Forever. And you don't even realize you're in it until it's way too late. That's an infinite loop trap. And it's one of the most quietly horrifying setups you'll ever face. At first, everything feels normal. Maybe you walk into a room, flip a switch, a door opens. Cool, you go through. Another room, another switch, another door. Easy. You keep moving forward, solving simple puzzles, doing what you're supposed to do. And then, 3 or 4 rooms later, something feels familiar. Like, wait, wasn't that wall there before? Didn't I already pick up this key? So you start to question it. You retrace your steps. And that's when it hits you. You're not moving forward. You're circling. But the loop isn't obvious. It's clever. It changes just enough each time. An object moves. The lighting shifts. A voice says something slightly different. So it tricks your brain into thinking you're making progress. But you're not. You're walking in circles inside a maze that has no exit. That's the genius of an infinite loop trap. It gives you hope. It dangles progress right in front of you. It lets you feel like you're in control, like you're solving something. But every step is just resetting the pattern. You're the hamster. The wheel is invisible. And the worst part is, you think it's your fault, like you just missed something, made a wrong turn, didn't push the right button. So you double down. You try harder. You start running instead of walking. But the faster you go, the deeper you sink. There's a psychological term for this. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. When people invest time or effort into something, they don't want to quit. They feel like stopping would mean admitting that it was all wasted. So instead, they push forward, hoping the next try will be the one that breaks the cycle. Infinite loop traps feed on that. They weaponize your need for resolution. They know you'll keep walking the same hallway again and again just to avoid admitting that maybe there's nothing on the other side. And these traps don't need to be physically dangerous to destroy you. They just need to exhaust you, confuse you, keep you thinking, just one more puzzle, just one more room. And while you're caught in that mindset, your sense of time disappears. You forget how long you've been inside. Hours, days, weeks. Doesn't matter. Because without any kind of change, real change, your brain stops tracking time. You lose the outside world. You lose yourself. Now imagine the loop is layered. You don't just repeat the same rooms. You repeat choices. You keep saving someone who always betrays you. You keep turning left because right was a dead end last time. But maybe that's part of the trap, too. Maybe right only works if you unlearn the lesson you already learned. The loop becomes a lie that rewrites itself every time you try to escape it. One especially cruel variation: the loop that rewards you for doing the wrong thing. You lie, and the door opens. You betray a teammate, and the puzzle unlocks. You start realizing that morality doesn't work here. That ethics, logic, even basic intuition, none of it applies. You either follow the loop's sick rules, or you stay stuck. And every time you play by its rules, you lose a piece of who you were before. It starts to feel like the trap is alive. Not just some mechanical cycle, but something watching you, studying you, shaping the loop to match your behavior. So if you get angry, the next loop is faster. If you give up, the next one becomes peaceful. It adapts like it's feeding off your reactions. That illusion of personalization. That's how it keeps you emotionally hooked. But here's the real nightmare. What if the loop has no exit, because there never was one? What if it's not about solving or escaping, but just accepting that you're inside something endless? Could you survive knowing that no matter what you do, it'll never be enough? That's the final layer of the trap. It doesn't just hold you in space, it holds you in mindset, in routine. It builds a world where looping becomes your new normal, and eventually you stop questioning it. And the moment you stop trying to escape, that's when the trap wins. Contradictory command traps. Picture this: you're standing in front of a control panel with two blinking buttons. A voice from above says, "Press both buttons at once, but never press both at the same time." You pause. Maybe you laugh nervously. Maybe you stare, trying to decode it. But the instruction doesn't change. Press both, but not together. That right there, that's not a riddle. That's a trap, a contradictory command trap. These are some of the most frustrating and maddening setups you'll ever face, because they don't just make no sense. They actively fight your ability to make sense of anything at all. They're designed to paralyze you, to short-circuit your logic by presenting two or more rules that cancel each other out. You're supposed to follow the command, but obeying one part always violates the other. And that's the whole point. Contradictory command traps exploit the part of your brain that wants to be obedient, structured, precise. Whether you realize it or not, most of us are conditioned to follow instructions. It starts in school, in work, in everyday life. So when you're thrown into a scenario that gives you an impossible order, you don't immediately say, "This is broken." You say, "Okay, I must be missing something." That doubt is the trap. That hesitation, that desperate search for a third option that doesn't exist, because your brain isn't wired to reject authority right away. It's wired to comply, to figure it out. And contradictory commands pull you in, keep you stuck, while you spiral through endless mental gymnastics trying to solve what was never solvable to begin with. One of the nastiest things about these traps is that they usually don't feel lethal at first. The voice just tells you, "Speak only when silent," or "Keep walking unless you stand still." And you think it's metaphorical, poetic, until the gas starts leaking into the room, until the floor begins to crack, until you realize that stalling for clarity is just giving the trap more time to close in. Here's a brutal example. A screen flashes. Open the door without opening it. There's a handle. You touch it. Alarm sounds. You back off. A camera above starts ticking down a timer. You pace, looking for another door. Nothing. Just that one, with a command that makes zero logical sense. You're trapped not by walls or locks, but by language, by instruction. The trap isn't physical, it's cognitive, and it's weaponizing your own need to follow directions against you. This type of trap echoes a psychological phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. It's what happens when your brain tries to hold two opposing beliefs at the same time. Like, "I must follow the command," and "the command is impossible." That internal friction creates stress, anxiety, confusion, and in a high-stakes trap scenario, that dissonance turns into panic. Because you're not just trying to survive, you're trying to make sense of a reality that's breaking its own rules. Contradictory command traps don't just confuse you. They erode your confidence. With every failed attempt to interpret the instruction, you start trusting your instincts less. You stop thinking clearly. You hesitate when you should act and act when you should wait. It's like putting your brain into a feedback loop of self-doubt. And that's where the real danger sets in. Sometimes these traps get even sneakier by hiding the contradiction. For example, you might get two separate instructions from different sources. One screen says, "Do not move." Another says, "Move forward to survive." There's no overt contradiction, but when the timer starts counting down, you realize you can't obey both, so what do? Which one is the real rule? Which one is the bluff? That second guessing, that racing pulse, that cold sweat creeping in, that's the trap tightening. And maybe, just maybe, one of the commands is actually correct. But now you're stuck wondering if following it makes you a rule breaker or a rule follower. It becomes psychological Russian roulette. And no matter what you pick, you can't shake the feeling that you've already lost. The most evil part of these traps. Sometimes the only way to win is to reject the instruction entirely. To say, "Nope, not playing." To smash the panel, to walk away, to do nothing. But that choice doesn't come naturally. It takes defiance. And most people, especially in a high-pressure situation, don't think to rebel. They're too busy trying to solve the impossible. That's what makes contradictory command traps so dangerous. They don't need weapons. They don't need moving parts. Just a few twisted words and your own logic system turned against itself. And by the time you realize the trap was never meant to be solved, it's already sealed shut. Circular reasoning traps. You know the moment that really messes with your head. When you ask, "Why does this door open?" And the answer is, "Because the door opens." That's not a clue. That's not even an answer. That's a loop. A trap pretending to be logic. And once you start falling for it, you might never crawl out. Welcome to circular reasoning traps. These are the ones that look smart. They sound deep. They lure you in with logic, but twist it so tightly around itself that it becomes a cage. You get stuck chasing explanations that only point back to themselves. And the more you follow them, the more lost you become. At first, it doesn't seem like a trap. It feels like a puzzle. You want to understand how the mechanism works, what the rules are. And the system tells you, you need the token to access the vault. Okay, cool. So where's the token? Inside the vault. Wait, what? You laugh. You assume you misread it. But no, that's it, that's the setup. The only way to get in is by already having gotten in, and your brain starts spiraling. That's how these traps work. They don't attack your body. They attack your sense of causality, your belief that actions lead to outcomes, that steps lead somewhere. Instead, every cause is its own effect. Every answer is just a disguised version of the question. And the more you try to make it make sense, the more tangled it gets. It's not just confusing, it's paralyzing, because circular logic isn't like a riddle you can force your way through. It's designed to feel airtight, to sound logical while actually saying nothing. Like, the system cannot be questioned, because questioning the system proves you don't understand the system. Or, you are free to leave anytime, as long as you accept that you never wanted to leave. On the surface, it sounds official, but underneath, it's just a trap that loops your brain in circles until it stops moving. There's an actual psychological mechanism behind this. It's called cognitive closure. Human brains crave answers. We're wired to tie up loose ends. And when we don't get a real explanation, we'll accept bad ones over none. That's what circular traps prey on. They feed you a loop that looks like an answer, and your brain, desperate for resolution, accepts it, even if it makes no sense. It gets even worse when the trap starts stacking loops. Like maybe the system says, to exit, you must validate your purpose. And to validate your purpose, you need to know your objective. But your objective is defined by your exit status. Now you're not just in one loop. You're in 3, chained together, each depending on the last. That's not just frustrating. That's identity erosion. Because at some point, you stop asking what's true and start asking if truth even matters in this space. And some circular reasoning traps are even more brutal because they come with consequences. You don't just get stuck. You get punished for trying to escape. Every time you try to break the loop, the system resets, or penalizes you, or starts again from the beginning. So now you're terrified to challenge the logic, because challenging it makes the trap tighten. Let's say you're trapped in a room with a voice that says, "You're being held here for your own safety." Sounds noble, right? But when you ask why you're in danger, the voice responds, "Because you're in here." That's not protection. That's entrapment wrapped in a fake justification. And if you start yelling, Start pushing back. The voice calmly says, "Your aggression confirms the danger." Suddenly, every reaction you have becomes proof that the system is right, that you deserve to be there. That loop, that's the real prison. The most dangerous thing about circular reasoning traps is they feel smart, like you're just not thinking hard enough. They trick you into doubting your own intuition, into believing that there's a deeper truth just out of reach. But there isn't. It's just mirrors. Mirrors reflecting other mirrors, until you forget which way is out. And by the time you realize that the only real move is to stop playing the game, to reject the loop entirely, you've already given it everything. Your focus, your sanity, your time. Because here's the cruelest part, the trap doesn't need to beat you. It just needs to make you keep looking for an answer that was never there. Impossible question traps. What do you say when a voice asks you, "What is the sound of silence screaming?" Or, if the truth is a lie, what does that make honesty? You pause. You think. You might even try to be clever. But that pause, that overthinking, that's exactly where the trap starts. Impossible question traps don't need spikes or mazes or codes. They just need your mind. They present a question that sounds like it has an answer, something profound or riddle-like, but it doesn't. Not really. The whole point is that the question can't be answered, and the more you try to crack it, the more you get tangled up in your own thoughts. At first, they feel like puzzles, maybe even philosophical, something you'd hear in a late-night dorm conversation. But when the stakes are real, when you're locked in a room and the walls are closing in, those questions stop being deep. They become weapons, because you start to feel like your life depends on finding an answer that doesn't exist. Here's how it works. A screen lights up. You hear a voice. "What color is time?" That's it. No instructions, just that. You look around. Nothing. No clues. No pattern. You try red. Nothing. Blue. Green. Nothing. Maybe you say, "That's not a real question." The screen flashes red. Wrong again. It's not just about the question itself. It's about the spiral it throws you into. You try to interpret it. You wonder if it's a metaphor. You think maybe it's based on something you missed earlier. But none of that helps. Because the trap isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's breaking you. Psychologists talk about something called epistemic paralysis. It's that mental freeze you get when your brain hits a problem it can't resolve. Your thoughts start looping. You doubt every assumption. You stop trusting yourself. And that's what impossible questions do. They induce that freeze. That quiet panic where the brain starts short-circuiting from its own overanalysis. Worse still, these questions often come with a fake sense of urgency. A countdown clock, a warning siren, maybe a door that starts sealing itself. You're now in survival mode. But the only tool you've got is your reasoning, and that's the very thing being used against you. Let's say the question is, what do you do when you can't do anything? That one hits harder than it should, because the real answer, the one no one wants to say, is nothing. But doing nothing in a trap feels like failure, so you start trying to do something. Anything. And that something is exactly how the trap tightens. Some of the worst ones trick you with circular logic. You get a prompt like, "What is the answer to this question if the answer is not this answer?" That kind of language breaks reality. You feel like you're chasing your tail in a maze that folds in on itself. And even if you try to opt out, say, "There is no answer," you get punished, because that is still an answer. The real damage happens when the trap makes you think you're close, when it rewards partial answers. Maybe you get a little green light or a chime. So you keep tweaking, keep second-guessing, keep chasing this ghost of a solution. It's like offering a thirsty person a drop of water every hour. Not enough to quench them, just enough to keep them hoping. And sometimes the impossible question isn't even verbal. It's emotional, something like, choose who to save, the innocent or the loyal. Or, which part of you will you betray to survive? These aren't just riddles. They're moral traps. They force you to reveal something about yourself. And once you do, the trap uses that information against you, because now it knows where to dig deeper. But here's the thing that makes these traps truly disturbing. Sometimes there is an answer, not a logical one, not a truthful one, but the one the trap wants. Maybe it's silence. Maybe it's a scream. Maybe it's a lie. You don't figure it out. You surrender to it. And that surrender, that's what leaves a mark. Because after the trap is over, you're left wondering, what did I just agree to? What did I give up just to make the question stop? That's what makes impossible question traps so insidious. You don't just get stuck. You walk away doubting yourself, not just what you said, but who you are. Puzzle box traps. You ever hold something in your hands and feel like it's watching you back? Not blinking, not moving, just waiting. That's a puzzle box trap. The thing that doesn't chase you, doesn't scream or bleed or explode. It just sits there, quiet, innocent, until you make the first move, and then it starts. See, puzzle boxes are seductive. They whisper that you're in control, that this is just a game, a clever challenge, a harmless object waiting to be solved. That's the lie. Because once you start trying to open it, you realize it's not just a box. It's a maze built for your mind. These traps don't just test intelligence. They test obsession. Because that's what puzzle boxes feed on. Not your brain, your need to figure things out. They use your curiosity as bait. They make you feel like the next twist, the next symbol, the next satisfying click will finally crack it open. But the truth, it's not a puzzle you solve. It's a trap that solves you. Let's break down how this works. You find a cube, no instructions, just a strange pattern etched into the surface. Maybe one part spins, another clicks. It hums when you touch it. It feels alive, and the longer you interact with it, the more the environment starts reacting. Maybe a light flickers. A wall shifts. Something changes, not enough to explain what's happening, but just enough to keep you hooked. And that's exactly what it wants. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement. It's the same thing that makes slot machines addictive. You press a button, nothing happens. You press it again, still nothing. But eventually, ding, you win something. Not much, just enough to keep you pressing. That's how puzzle box traps work. They don't reward you consistently. They reward you unpredictably. So every time you get a reaction, you go deeper. You commit. You stop thinking about escape. You just want to finish what you started. Now here's where it gets dark. Some puzzle boxes punish you for solving them the wrong way. Maybe one path opens a panel, another releases gas, another triggers a countdown, and you don't know which is which until it's too late. That's when the trap stops pretending to be a game. That's when you realize you were never solving it. You were being judged by it. Worse still, some puzzle boxes aren't even meant to be solved at all. They're infinite, recursive. You twist one ring, and 3 more symbols appear. You solve a panel, and the box gets bigger. The closer you think you are, the further away the end becomes. And that's when you start breaking. Not from fear, from exhaustion. From the slow, creeping realization that the box is never going to let you win. But by then, it's already too late to stop. And just to be clear, these traps don't need to be supernatural. They can be completely mechanical, completely logical, and still drive you insane. Because what they do is turn your own reasoning into a leash. They make you chase answers until the room closes in around you. Until you forget there's a way out that doesn't involve finishing it. A real world parallel. The Chinese puzzle known as the impossible knot. It looks like a simple wooden lattice, but every move you make unlocks something else. And locks two other things. There's only one correct sequence out of thousands. Miss one step, and you reset the whole thing. It's not just hard. It's hypnotic. You get stuck trying again, and again, and again. And that loop, that frustration, that addiction to getting it right, that's the real trap. And then there's the psychological twist. Some puzzle box traps change based on who's solving them. Your movements, your choices, your hesitation, they're all inputs, and the box responds to them. Adapts. It learns what kind of solver you are. Are you reckless, patient, methodical? It uses that against you. If you hesitate, it punishes stillness. If you rush, it punishes action. It calibrates its cruelty to fit your mind. Eventually, you stop asking, "How do I solve this?" and start asking, "Why am I still doing this?" And the answer is because it worked. The trap worked. Puzzle boxes are dangerous not because they're loud or violent, but because they feel like they respect you, like they were built for someone smart, someone worthy. And once you believe that, you're hooked. You stop seeing it as a trap. You start seeing it as proof of your intelligence, of your value, of your ability to win. But some games aren't meant to be won, and some boxes are meant to be left closed. Reverse logic traps. Imagine walking into a room where everything seems normal until it isn't. You flip a switch and the lights turn off. You drink water and get more thirsty. You run toward the exit and somehow end up right back where you started. That's not just weird. That's reverse logic. And when it's used as a trap, it doesn't just twist reality, it twists your instincts. This kind of trap messes with your deepest expectations. It punishes you for doing the obvious thing, the thing that should work, the thing that always works. Reverse logic traps don't hide the rules. They flip them and watch you suffer while trying to play a rigged game by normal rules. At first, it feels like a glitch. You step on a pressure plate and expect the door to open. Instead, the lights go out and a wall shifts behind you. You try stepping off. Nothing. You jump back on. Still nothing. You figure maybe you're missing something, right? You try again. But the trap isn't broken. That's exactly how it's meant to behave. The whole thing is wired to break your brain. It rewards failure, punishes success, makes the wrong path feel right and the right path feel suicidal. For example, a sign says, "Do not pull this lever." That's it. That's the whole clue. Most people pause, think, overthink. You wonder, is this reverse psychology? A bluff, a trick within a trick. So you wait. You search for alternatives. Maybe there's a code, maybe a pressure panel, maybe a hidden button. But no, the only way forward is to do the thing you're told not to pull the lever. And that moment, that hesitation before you do the opposite of what logic tells you, that's what the trap feeds on. Because reverse logic traps weaponize conditioning. They take everything you've learned from every other puzzle, every escape room, every game, every life experience, and flip it upside down. And when your instincts betray you, you start doubting everything. Not just the trap, yourself. That voice inside that says, "This feels right." Suddenly, it's the enemy. It's psychological whiplash. And it's been studied. There's something called negative transfer. It's when previous learning interferes with new learning. Like if you've spent years pressing the red button to stop a machine, and then one day the red button starts the machine instead. Your brain still wants to press it to stop it, even though you know it doesn't work that way anymore. That mental lag. That's what reverse logic traps exploit. They don't confuse you randomly. They confuse you predictably. They work even better under pressure. Imagine you're in a room filling with water. There are two valves. One marked drain. One marked fill. You don't think twice. You turn the drain valve, and the water rushes in faster. That's when you realize it. The labels are reversed. Or maybe they're not. Maybe the trap just thinks you'd assume that and labeled them correctly, which would make the fill valve the actual drain. Or maybe that's what it wants you to think. See how fast your brain spirals. And that's the point. You get paralyzed, trapped in this tug of war between action and second guessing. You're not stuck because the room is locked. You're stuck because you don't trust your own logic anymore. Some of the cruelest versions don't even reveal that reverse logic is in play until the very end. You might go through the entire space doing things that make sense, and nothing works. No feedback, no error, just quiet failure. Only later do you discover that every correct input was the wrong one. The silence wasn't a bug. It was punishment for trusting normal logic. Or worse, maybe the system was listening. Maybe every time you turned left, it marked that as wrong. Every time you avoided a trap, it logged your avoidance. And then it adapts. Next time, the correct path is the one you were sure was dangerous. The path you've been trained to avoid. So now, you're second guessing not just the room, but yourself, your instincts, your training. And once you reach that state, where you question every step, every decision, every gut feeling, the trap has already won. Because reverse logic traps don't kill you with poison or spikes or monsters. They kill you with doubt. Slowly, quietly, by making you afraid to act, or worse, making you act with false confidence in exactly the wrong direction. That's what makes these traps so devastating. It's not that they're unsolvable. It's that they make you solve against yourself. And once you've played that game, you don't walk away the same. Language trick traps. You walk into a room and see a sentence glowing on the wall. It says the answer is a lie. And suddenly your brain hesitates. Because what does that mean? Is the answer literally the word lie? Is the sentence lying? Or is the answer supposed to be something false? You haven't even touched anything, and you're already trapped. Language trick traps don't scream or lunge or grab. They wait. They use the most innocent thing in the world against you: words. Words you've trusted your whole life. Labels, signs, instructions, clues. But the second you try to use them like you always do, they flip the meaning and trap you in your own assumptions. These traps play a nasty psychological game. They're built to twist your expectations, mess with your instincts, and wreck your trust in logic. You're not solving puzzles here. You're untangling double meanings, decoding illusions buried in language itself. And the longer you try to think your way out, the more tangled it gets. Let's say there's a panel with 2 buttons, one labeled safe, one labeled danger. Your brain makes a snap judgment. Press safe, but nothing happens. Or maybe the room starts shaking. Because here, safe doesn't mean what you think. Maybe it's the name of the trap. Maybe danger is the only way out. Or maybe neither label means anything, and you're being judged on whether or not you hesitate. These traps feed on ambiguity. They use things like homophones and polysemy. Homophones are words that sound the same but mean completely different things. Like right and right and right. If a trap asks you to perform the right and write it down, your brain short circuits. Not because you're confused by the words themselves, but because you're overwhelmed by the overlap. Which one is correct? Are they all correct? Are they all wrong? And polysemy. That's when one word holds multiple meanings. Take the word record. If a trap says record the answer, does that mean say it out loud? Does it mean write it down? Does it mean store it for later? And what if you choose wrong? What if your action determines the trap's response? Suddenly it's not just a word. It's a loaded weapon. Even punctuation gets used against you. A single comma can flip the meaning of a sentence. Like no escape versus no escape. One implies doom, the other a command to survive. Imagine facing that choice under a countdown, smoke in the room, your adrenaline spiking. Most people freeze. Some people choose wrong and never get a second chance. But these traps go deeper than just trick phrases. Some rooms set rules using contradictory logic. Say the opposite of what you mean or fail. That sounds clever until you try it. You say go hoping it means stop. You say dark hoping it unlocks a light. But then the trap responds with failure. Because maybe you didn't do it backwards enough. Or maybe the rule itself was a trick. Maybe saying the opposite of what you mean only works if you mean to say it truthfully while intending it falsely. You see how this gets twisted fast. There's an actual psychological effect that explains why these traps are so effective. It's called semantic overload. That's when your brain is forced to process too many possible meanings at once. It creates confusion. It slows your reaction time. You start second, guessing your own understanding of simple words, and that's exactly what these traps want. One of the most brutal variations. Recursive commands. A voice says tell the truth if this sentence is false. That loops your logic until it collapses, or you're told the answer lies. You don't know if lies is a verb, a noun, or a misdirection. Every path opens a new contradiction. Some rooms turn silence into the only solution, because every answer you give is wrong. Every word you speak sets off another layer of deception. Even your voice becomes a liability. You're stuck in a space where understanding language is what kills you or keeps you locked inside. And the scariest part, it doesn't need to be supernatural. This is just language. Twisted, flipped, reversed. The same way cult leaders confuse their followers. The same way propaganda redefines truth. It's not magic. It's control over what you think things mean. So now you hesitate at every word. You don't trust labels. You don't trust commands. You don't even trust your own thoughts. Because maybe the trap wasn't in the sentence. Maybe the trap was in the way you read it. And once language stops being safe, nothing is. Hidden assumption traps. You walk into a room with a big red button in the center. A sign above it reads press to proceed. Simple, right? You press it. A wall opens. Progress. Or so you think, because 10 minutes later, you realize you triggered a timer. Something is ticking down now. Quietly. You didn't hear it. You didn't see it. but it started the second you acted on an assumption you didn't even know you made. That is the core of a hidden assumption trap. It doesn't attack your logic. It attacks your blind spots, the things you never stop to question because they feel too basic, too obvious. These traps aren't based on misdirection. They're based on everything you take for granted, and that's what makes them vicious. They don't just twist your brain. They make you doubt your grip on reality. Here's how they work. Let's say you're solving a puzzle that requires placing 3 weights on a pressure plate. The diagram shows 3 circles. You find 3 metal spheres. You place them in. Nothing happens. You check your math, your steps. Everything seems right. But here's the catch. You assume the spheres were weights. They're not. They're triggers. And the actual weights are hidden in a different corner of the room. You made one silent assumption at the start, and the trap lets you build an entire strategy on that mistake. And you don't even realize you're trapped until it's way too late. Psychologists call this cognitive framing. Your brain builds a mental model of how a situation works based on your first few observations. That model filters everything else. But when the model is flawed, everything you do after gets pulled in the wrong direction. And the more committed you are to your first assumption, the more likely you are to ignore the signs that something's off. It's why magicians get away with simple tricks. They don't need to hide the truth. They just need you looking in the wrong direction. Hidden assumption traps do the same thing. They blind you by letting you believe you're smart. Here's a brutal example. A trap presents you with 4 doors. One says fire. One says ice. One says void. One says life. You assume life is the safe door. It sounds positive. It feels like the correct answer in a world that's constantly punishing you for choosing danger. But what if that door leads to an endless loop? What if the trap assumes you'll avoid fire and void and ice, and uses that against you? The assumption isn't just wrong. It's fatal. Another variation plays with sequences. You find a pattern on the wall. 1, 2, 4, 8. You assume it's doubling, so you press 16. Wrong. The actual pattern was binary. The answer was 32. But your brain latched onto the simplest explanation first and never let go. That's what these traps feed on, your first reaction. The worst part, hidden assumption traps reward you early. That's how they build confidence. They give you tiny victories for playing along. You press the button, the light turns green. You step on the tile, the door opens. Everything seems to work. Until suddenly, it doesn't. And by then, you're deep inside a logic you didn't realize was built on sand. Some traps even wait for you to fix what was never broken. You solve the puzzle. The exit lights up. But you think it was too easy, you second guess it. You touch something else. And the room resets. Now you're stuck not because you failed, but because you assumed you had to try harder. You see this kind of failure in the real world too. In complex systems, aviation, software, even medicine. Sometimes a disaster happens not because someone did something wrong, but because they followed a flawed assumption that no one ever questioned. A lever mislabeled. A process skipped because it was always skipped. It's not stupidity. It's pattern blindness. And that's what makes hidden assumption traps so devastating. They don't make you feel confused. They make you feel confident, right up until everything falls apart. So how do you fight them? You don't solve. You assume. You pause before every choice and ask what you're taking for granted. What feels obvious? What seems too easy? And then you question that, because that's usually where the trap is hiding. Not in what you don't know, but in what you're sure you do. And once you've been caught in one of these, you start seeing them everywhere, even outside the game, in everyday life, in conversations, in choices you've been making automatically for years. That's when it gets real. That's when you realize some traps don't need walls. They just need belief. And most of the time, you never even know you were caught. Wordplay traps. You walk into a room and see a riddle on the wall. It says the more you take, the more you leave behind. You blurt out time. Nothing happens. You try silence. Still nothing. Then you notice something weird. Every word in the room is spelled backward. And that's when it clicks. The answer was footprints. But you weren't solving a riddle. You were solving a pun disguised as a puzzle, buried inside a trap that wanted you to think too literally. That is a wordplay trap, and they are absolutely vicious. These traps don't just mess with language. They mess with meaning. They twist your understanding of logic and reality by turning language into a trick mirror. Every word is a potential lie. Every phrase has a double edge, and you only see the real meaning once it's already too late. What makes wordplay traps so cruel is they feel playful at first. Harmless. You see rhymes. You see clever clues. You think, oh, this is fun. But it's not fun. It's a setup. These traps are built on linguistic landmines. They want you to smile. They want you to lower your guard. And that's when they pull the floor out from under you. Here's how it works. A trap might say the password and enter. So you say open sesame, or password, or a code you found earlier, but nothing happens. You try again, and again. Then you say nothing, out of frustration, and suddenly the door opens, because nothing was the password. Literally, you got trapped in a pun. And now you realize the whole thing was rigged from the beginning. Another example. A screen flashes solve this what has keys but can't open locks. Obvious, right? A piano. But then a keyboard falls from the ceiling and smashes. Because the trap expected you to say piano and punished you for missing the other interpretation. You weren't being tested on logic. You were being tested on interpretation, and that is a completely different kind of pressure. Wordplay traps often use a technique called lexical ambiguity. That's when a word or phrase has multiple meanings based on context, like the word bark. It can be part of a tree or the sound a dog makes. So if a trap says bring bark to wake the guardian, you have to figure out which version it means. Tree bark, dog sounds, a command to shout, or is the answer none of the above, and the trap is punishing you for trying to think in straight lines? There's also phonetic confusion. Words that sound identical but have different meanings. The trap might say you must bear the truth. Do they mean bear, as in endure? Or do they mean strip it down? Or do they literally mean bring a bear into the room? And you laugh, but only for a second, because while you're laughing, the ceiling is getting lower. These traps are more than clever. They're manipulative. They rely on your need to make sense of language, your instinct to solve based on patterns you already know. They twist those instincts into liabilities. Some of the darkest versions use visual wordplay. You'll see a sign that says do not read this. So you don't. But that's the test. If you don't read it, you fail. If you do read it, it changes to say you failed by reading. It becomes a trap of self-reference and contradiction, all based on how you interpret one sentence. And the worst part is you think you're being smart. That's what makes it sting. You think you outplayed the trap, when really it outplayed you. What makes wordplay traps stick with you is not just that they're hard. It's that they feel unfair in a way that hits deep. They punish your cleverness. They humiliate your intelligence. They make you feel like you're playing a game where the rules are constantly shifting, and no one tells you when the rules even change. And once you've been hit by one, you start seeing them everywhere. In riddles, in signs, in casual conversations that suddenly feel a little too loaded. You begin to question every instruction, every title, every name. Because what if it's all just one more trap waiting to twist itself into something you missed? Wordplay traps force you to slow down. They train you not to trust the surface. They turn language into a minefield where the thing that seems clever might be the thing that kills you. You don't just solve these. You survive them, and after that, you never read anything the same way again. Ambiguous meaning traps. Imagine this. You walk into a room with one sentence written in giant letters on the floor. The sentence just says you will choose wrong. That's it. No instructions. No door. No timer. Just that sentence and two levers on opposite walls. One is labeled red. The other is labeled not read. And now you're frozen, because everything you do from this point forward is being watched by that sentence. These are ambiguous meaning traps, and they don't rely on puzzles or booby traps or fancy tech. All they need is one sentence, one word, one symbol, something that seems straightforward until you realize nothing about it is. These traps weaponize interpretation. They don't care about right or wrong. They care about how you define right and wrong. That sentence on the floor. It might be a threat. It might be a warning. It might be a prophecy. Or it might just be a lie. And if you pick red, you're choosing wrong. If you pick not red, you're choosing wrong. If you hesitate, that might count as a wrong choice too. You don't know. That's the trap. See? Our brains are wired to resolve ambiguity fast. Like we're built to pick the most likely meaning and stick with it. It's called cognitive closure. The moment something feels unclear, we reach for the first stable meaning we can find. It helps us function. It keeps us from spinning into confusion. But in here, that reflex gets turned against you. Ambiguous traps offer you clarity just long enough for you to hang yourself with it. Let's say there's a voice that tells you pick the real path. You see two hallways. One lit, one dark. Real path. That phrase starts chewing your brain. Real as in authentic. Real as in not illusion. Real as in not metaphorical. And what counts as illusion anyway in a place where everything is built to lie to you? One hallway might look safer. So your instinct says real must mean safe. Or maybe the real path is the one that scares you. Maybe the trap wants to see if you'll go toward what feels fake. Maybe the trick is that neither path is real and the real path is behind you. You don't know, and there's no way to know. The sentence was never meant to guide you. It was meant to trap you in your own interpretation. And here's the real twist. You're not just reacting to what's there. You're reacting to your idea of what the trap wants. You start second-guessing what it means by real or true or left or exit. And that self-doubt becomes part of the trap's design. Another example. You come across a message etched into the wall. It reads, "Leave what you found." Simple enough. So you put back the key. You put back the coin. But the door doesn't open. Then you realize. Maybe what you found was the message itself. Maybe you were supposed to erase the sentence. Or maybe you weren't supposed to leave anything. Maybe the sentence refers to a memory, or an idea, or the room itself. It never told you what leave meant, or what found meant. It just assumed you'd fill in the blanks yourself, and that's exactly how it traps you. These aren't logic puzzles. These are belief traps. They trap your tendency to trust words, to build meaning around vague language. Because, let's be honest, we do that all the time. We hear a rule, we assign it intent, we read a sentence, we assign it tone. But none of that is in the words themselves. It's in us. And that's why ambiguous meaning traps feel so personal when they break us. They make us feel like we misunderstood something we never had a chance to understand. They also mess with how we think time works. You might hear something like the answer is what you already know. Now the pressure's on. You think maybe it's a riddle. Maybe it's your name. But then nothing happens. Why? Because you assumed the sentence was a hint for now. Maybe it was meant for the past. Maybe you already said the answer earlier and missed it. Maybe you've already failed. And the trap is just waiting for you to catch up. Every ambiguous trap leaves you with one haunting question. Was I wrong? Or was the question meaningless from the start? And that's where they hit the hardest. Because these traps don't just confuse you. They make you question how meaning works at all. They turn every word into a weapon, every instruction into a mirror, every choice into a bet against your own brain. And once you fall into that rabbit hole, it's nearly impossible to climb back out without second-guessing everything else you thought you understood. Because in here, clarity isn't a gift. It's bait. False premise traps. There's a lever in front of you and a message carved into the wall that says pull this and the left door opens. That's it. No timer. No riddle. Just a lever and a promise. You pull it. A door opens. But it's the right one. And inside is a drop. No floor, just air. You didn't mess up the sequence. You didn't make a logic mistake. You followed the instructions perfectly. But the instructions were built on a lie. That's a false premise trap. These are the kind of traps that don't just mess with your decisions. They mess with the foundation of your decisions. You're not solving something wrong. You're solving the wrong thing entirely. These traps hand you a loaded script, and you don't even know you're reading from it. What makes false premise traps so dangerous is how invisible they are at the start. They give you everything you think you need: a rule, a goal, a label, a trigger, and you assume it's all part of the game. But the game already started before you walked in, and it's not being played on your terms. Let's break down how this works. Say you walk into a room with 3 buttons. Above them it says press the one that lies. Now your brain kicks into overdrive. You assume one button tells the truth, one lies, one does nothing. Classic logic puzzle, right? But what if the sentence itself is a lie? What if none of the buttons do anything at all? Or what if pressing any button activates the trap? Because the sentence was designed to give you a false framework to work inside. You're not solving a puzzle. You're solving a false narrative that keeps changing the second you interact with it. This is where it gets psychological. Humans crave structure. When we face a situation with unclear rules, we invent rules to make sense of it. We see patterns in chaos. That instinct helps us navigate life, but it's also the exact thing false premise traps feed on. They don't mislead you. They let you mislead yourself. Another example. You find 2 doors. One labeled safe, one labeled unsafe. You assume it's a moral test or a logic trick. But what if the real trap is assuming the labels are connected to the doors at all? Maybe they were switched. Maybe they were meant for the hallway you came from. Or maybe the trap is counting on you avoiding the unsafe door when that's the only one that actually leads anywhere. The lie doesn't have to be big. It just has to be early. That's the trick. A false premise at the start infects every step after. And by the time you figure out what went wrong, you're buried 5 layers deep in solutions to a problem that never existed. You've probably experienced this in real life too. You make a decision based on something someone said. Later, you find out that thing wasn't true. But everything you did after still felt right, because you were solving based on information you trusted. That's what these traps recreate. They give you that exact frustration, that sick twist in your gut when you realize you built your escape plan on a lie. One of the most evil versions of this trap goes like this. The room tells you find the key to escape. So you tear everything apart looking for a key. And when you finally give up, you realize the door was never locked. It was open the whole time, but the sentence shaped your entire reality. You never thought to check. You trusted the rules, and they betrayed you. False premise traps don't want you to fail by accident. They want you to succeed at the wrong thing. They want to watch you pour your energy into solving a lie with perfect logic. And then they pull the curtain back and show you how deep you were trapped in your own assumptions. There's only one way to beat these. Question the question. When something feels too clear, too direct, too structured, pause. Ask if the frame itself might be broken, not the content, the context. Because sometimes the deadliest part of the trap isn't what it tells you, it's what it lets you believe without ever saying a word. Ambiguous timeframe traps. You walk into a room and a voice says the decision has already been made. That's it. No countdown, no door mechanism, no obvious threat, just that sentence. You look around, waiting for something to happen, but nothing does. You check for clues, buttons, triggers. Still nothing, and then it hits you. The trap isn't asking you to act. It's punishing you for not realizing you already did. That's what makes ambiguous timeframe traps so brutal. They don't trap your body. They trap your perception of time. See, most traps work in the present. You do something, something reacts. Simple cause and effect. But ambiguous timeframe traps mess with when things matter. They warp your sense of before, now, and after, and suddenly, every action you've taken, or didn't take, is suspect. These traps thrive on the gap between what happened and when it mattered. Let's say you walk through a corridor. At the end, there's a pedestal that says you must have entered with clean hands. You look at your hands. Covered in dust from a chest you opened 3 rooms back. But there were no warnings, no signs. Nothing said touching it would be a problem. And now, too late, you realize the trap wasn't in the chest. It was in the sequence. These traps don't warn you ahead of time. They retroactively assign value to your choices. It's like stepping on a landmine you planted earlier, without knowing it. And what's worse, you'll never be totally sure what triggered it, because the damage comes delayed. That time lag, that ambiguity, that's the trap. You might find a door that says only those who have not lied may enter. But lied when? Just now. Ever. Since you entered the building. Since you were born. And how would it know? These traps don't give you the luxury of real, time feedback. You think you're safe. Then 20 minutes later, a hallway collapses and a message flashes liar. And now you're questioning everything you said since you got here. This messes with your head in a deep way, because we're wired to understand time as linear. Action leads to result. That's how we survive. But in these traps, action and result are disconnected. They make the past feel like quicksand. You walk confidently forward, only to find out the floor behind you has been crumbling the whole time. And here's where it gets even nastier. Sometimes, the trap isn't waiting for something you did. It's waiting for something you didn't do. Maybe you passed a panel and didn't touch it. Maybe you saw a flashing light and ignored it. Maybe there was a chance to speak a phrase that felt irrelevant at the time. And now the trap judges you not for a failure, but for a missed moment. These traps are often disguised as timing puzzles. But they're not about speed. They're about awareness. They're testing whether you're thinking in layers. If you're willing to question not just what a choice means, but when that choice will come back to haunt you. It's the same psychological mechanic behind regret. A study from Cornell once showed that long-term regret is more commonly tied to inaction than action. These traps exploit that. They make you feel the weight of what you didn't do, what you overlooked, what you dismissed because the timing didn't seem urgent. And then there's the final twist. Sometimes, the trap gives you a message like the test will begin soon. So you wait, you analyze, you prepare. Minutes pass, nothing changes. You start to panic. Maybe you missed it. Maybe it started already. Maybe the test wasn't a test at all, but a timer measuring how long it would take before you acted. Or maybe the message was meant for the room before this one, and you're just catching it late. That uncertainty eats at you. It makes every second feel loaded. You start questioning the order of events. You stop trusting your own timeline. And that's exactly what the trap wants. Because once you no longer trust time, you no longer trust yourself. And that's the moment it has you. Contradiction traps. You're in a room with two levers. One is labeled pull to survive. The other says never pull or you die. And then a voice says the door will only open if you obey all instructions. That's it. That's the entire setup. You stare at the levers. You read the signs again. You try to piece it together like a riddle. But no matter what angle you take, one thing becomes crystal clear. There is no consistent path that satisfies every rule. Welcome to a contradiction trap. This is the kind of trap that doesn't just try to hurt you. It tries to fry your brain. Because in this room, logic is not a weapon. It's bait. Contradiction traps work by giving you two or more rules that cancel each other out. And they don't do it by accident. They do it in a way that feels just believable enough to keep you thinking there's a clever way out. You'll try to analyze, to reframe, to get smart with it. But what you're really doing is playing tug-of-war with a knot that was never meant to untangle. Take a basic version. You enter a hallway with a sign that says do not speak. Then another sign says the test will begin when you say the phrase I am ready. Already, you're stuck. If you follow one rule, you break the other. And if you try to cheat it by whispering or mouthing the words, you might trigger an entirely different penalty. That's the beauty of contradiction traps. They punish you no matter what. The more you try to outthink them, the deeper they pull you in. These traps are psychological warfare. They're designed to force a mental stalemate. You try one route, then backtrack. Try the opposite, then hesitate. You burn time. You burn energy. And worst of all, you burn your trust in your own judgment. Because here's what makes contradiction traps so vicious. They flip the script. Normally, we trust that if we think long enough, we'll find a consistent rule set. That's how everything else works. If something doesn't make sense, we assume we just haven't figured it out yet. But contradiction traps weaponize that assumption. They trick you into chasing coherence in a system that was built to collapse. It's the same trick used in certain types of paradoxes. Think of the classic liar puzzle. If someone says, "I always lie," are they telling the truth or lying? If they're lying, then they don't always lie. But if they're telling the truth, then the statement is false. There's no stable resolution, and your brain keeps trying to find one anyway. That tension, that desperate tug between incompatible rules, is exactly what these traps amplify. Now imagine being in a trap where the system punishes indecision. Maybe the floor starts heating up. Maybe the lights dim every time you hesitate. You're stuck between two impossible commands, but doing nothing is its own kind of failure. So you start to panic. You tell yourself maybe one rule matters more. Maybe one is fake. Maybe the contradiction is a trick and there's a deeper hidden instruction underneath. But the moment you try to act on any of those guesses, you're still breaking at least one rule. There is no correct move, and that is the trap. Some versions get even nastier. You might find a written clue that says obey the first instruction you see. Then 3 steps later, you see a new sign that says ignore all previous instructions. Now what? Obeying the second sign breaks the first rule, but obeying the first rule forces you to disobey the second. The loop starts folding in on itself, and suddenly the entire trap becomes a mirror reflecting your own confusion back at you. This type of trap is especially dangerous because it doesn't just test your thinking, it tests your emotional endurance. Can you act under pressure when the rules are lying to you? Can you make a decision knowing that whatever you do, it might be wrong? That mental pressure builds. You start second-guessing everything. Even when you leave the room, the trap sticks with you. Because contradiction traps don't end when you escape them. They keep echoing in your head, making you wonder if you truly found the way out or just picked the lesser of 2 failures. There's no trick to beating these. No formula. Sometimes the only way through is to realize that the rules are broken on purpose, and that means you have to stop trying to win the game and start trying to break it. You stop obeying. You stop hesitating. You commit, knowing full well that there is no perfect path, because in a contradiction trap, the most dangerous thing isn't the rules. It's believing that all rules deserve to be followed. Misleading question traps. There's a voice overhead, calm, smooth, almost helpful. It says answer truthfully to proceed. Then the question drops. Have you stopped hiding the artifact yet? You pause. The words are simple, but something feels wrong. You never hid an artifact. You don't even know what artifact it's talking about. But here's the catch. The question already assumes you did, and now you're stuck answering a question that locks you into guilt no matter what you say. That's a misleading question trap. It's not just a trick of language. It's a weaponized assumption, a question that folds the lie into the question itself. And if you accept the question, you've already lost the game. Most people are used to questions being neutral. We're trained to hear a question and respond. It feels like a basic, fair interaction. But these traps use questions like landmines. They are built to corner your logic, confuse your memory, or worse, rewrite your understanding of what even happened in the first place. They don't confuse you with complexity. They trick you into giving up control by accepting the frame. Let's say you walk into a chamber with 2 chairs, one red, one black. A screen lights up and asks, "Why did you choose the red chair?" That's all it says. But here's the thing. You didn't choose it. You haven't even moved yet. But now the game is already responding as if you made a choice. And the moment you start explaining your imaginary decision, you are now playing inside its false logic. You defend something you never did, and in doing so, you accept that it happened. It's psychological quicksand. The more you try to explain, the deeper you sink. These kinds of traps play into a glitch in the way we think. Psychologists call it presupposition. It means the question you're asked already assumes something to be true, and if you don't challenge that assumption directly, you accept it by default. Like being asked, "What time did you leave the restricted zone?" Even if you answer, "I didn't," the brain still registers the idea that you were there. In high-pressure environments, people often skip the challenge and just react to the part of the question that sounds answerable. And that's where the trap wins. Misleading question traps are especially brutal when paired with urgency. Picture this. Lights are flickering, sirens are blaring, and a countdown has started. A message appears. You must confess before time runs out. Why did you tamper with the security feed? Again, you didn't. But the trap doesn't care. It wants you to panic, to rush, to fill the silence. So you start explaining what you were doing, defending your timeline, trying to justify your presence. And just like that, you've handed the trap everything it needs, because it's not after a real answer. It's after your reaction. The worst part, these traps are rarely solved by logic. They're solved by realizing the question is the trick, not the situation, not the environment. Just the question itself. It's a mental bait that pulls you off balance. And the moment you try to answer it like it's fair, the moment you try to play by the logic it hands you, you're already stuck in its frame. There's a version of this that's even more subtle. You might be asked which door is safer, knowing full well both doors lead to danger. But instead of questioning that, you pick the one that feels slightly less risky. And now you've accepted that you have to go through a door at all. That was never confirmed. You made that leap yourself. The trap didn't force you in. It just handed you a broken choice and watched you trap yourself. That's the genius of it. These traps don't move. They don't activate. They just ask. And wait. And they're betting on the fact that you'll talk yourself into a corner without realizing what's happening. The only way out of a misleading question trap is to slow down. Break the question apart. Ask yourself, what is this question assuming? What is it trying to make me agree to without saying it directly? If something feels off, it probably is. You're not being asked for the truth. You're being tested to see if you'll accept a lie in question form. Because once you do, the trap doesn't need to restrain you. You'll do that part yourself. Double meaning traps. You walk into a pitch black room. A single voice speaks. It says, "Tell me something with weight." That's it. That's the only prompt. So you respond with something deep, something emotional. You think you're being clever, maybe even poetic. But then the trap buzzes. A hatch opens, and you see a scale. Turns out, it was asking for physical mass, not meaning. You were wrong, but you weren't stupid. You were just caught in a double meaning trap. These are the kinds of traps that smile while they stab you. They don't confuse you with rules or numbers or flashing lights. They just use language, pure, simple language, and they twist it. What makes them so dangerous is that they never lie to you. Every word they use is technically correct. But the interpretation, That's where it all unravels. Double meaning traps are built to take your strength, your ability to reason, to listen, to analyze, and aim it against you. They give you a sentence, a symbol, maybe a question, and that sentence has two meanings, one logical, one literal, one abstract, one physical, one metaphorical, one mechanical. Both are valid, but only one will save you, and the trap won't tell you which. Here's how it plays out. You find a screen that says, "Speak the truth." You stand there thinking this is a test of honesty. You start speaking from the heart. You admit your fears, your regrets. You tell the room your real truth. But nothing happens. Then you realize the truth it wanted was a password labeled truth in a file you saw 3 rooms ago. You missed it. Not because you lied, but because you interpreted the words the wrong way. That's what makes these so lethal. You never know if you're failing because you're overthinking it or underthinking it. Was the trap asking you to interpret, or to take the instruction literally? That constant seesaw between meanings wears you down. You start second, guessing your instincts. You begin to mistrust your own ability to read language at all. This works because of a flaw in how our brains handle ambiguity. Our minds are wired to prioritize context. If you're in a poetic setting, you look for poetic meaning. If you're in a technical setting, you look for literal meaning. But traps like this exist to blur that line. They set you up in one emotional space and then punish you for responding in kind. There's a version of this where you walk into a room with a giant speaker and a keypad. The voice says, "Enter the key phrase." And in that moment, you have to decide, does it mean a secret phrase? Or is it telling me to physically enter the phrase using the keypad? You go for one. The trap was waiting for the other. And now you're locked in. The most brutal double-meaning traps don't just give you a sentence. They use symbols. One door marked open. One door marked free. Which one do you trust? Open might be literal. A door that isn't locked. Or it might mean you'll be vulnerable, exposed. Free could mean freedom. Or it could mean there's no protection, no price, no safety. Words that seem like gifts become knives. And the longer you stare, the worse it gets. Sometimes the trap doesn't even trigger when you get it wrong. It triggers when you hesitate too long trying to figure it out. You're not punished for choosing the wrong meaning. You're punished for not choosing at all. That mental paralysis. That moment where you're spinning in your own head, trying to weigh interpretations. That is exactly what the trap was built to create. And when it finally activates, when the ceiling drops, or the floor gives out, or the timer runs out, you're left with nothing but the sick feeling that it all hinged on a single word. A word that had 2 faces. And you guessed the wrong one. So how do you survive a trap like this? You sharpen your sensitivity to ambiguity. You stop assuming clarity is your friend. You learn to read a sentence and ask not just what it says, but how many ways it can be read. You stop trusting surface meaning. You dig. You ask what's missing. What context is being withheld? You get faster at spotting words that bend. Words like light, like pass, like mark, like silence. Words that feel obvious but are anything but. Because in a double-meaning trap, the real danger isn't misunderstanding the words. It's thinking you understood them at all. Sensory confusion traps. You're walking down a hallway that smells like lavender. The walls are smooth, but the floor feels subtly uneven, like it's tilting ever so slightly to the left. Then a door slams behind you. Lights flicker, not in a broken way, but like they're following a rhythm. You hear footsteps echoing, but your own steps are silent. You look ahead, and the hallway appears to stretch longer the more you walk. This isn't just disorienting. It's not a glitch or a dream. You've just stepped into a sensory confusion trap. These traps don't ask you riddles or force you to solve logic puzzles. They attack something deeper, your perception itself. What you see, hear, smell, feel, and even taste gets hijacked. The trap doesn't need to restrain you physically. If it can make you question your own senses, it has already won. Our brains are built to trust patterns. We rely on sensory input to tell us what's real, what's safe, and what's next. But these traps know that perception is not fact, it's interpretation. And that interpretation can be twisted, delayed, or scrambled without you even realizing it. Imagine this. You walk into a room filled with mirrors. You think, great, a visual maze. But then the lights dim and the temperature drops. You feel cold air on your right side, so you turn left. But that cold air wasn't real. It was an artificial current pumped in to steer you off course. You step forward, following what sounds like your own breathing, only to discover the sound was recorded and played back to make you think someone is behind you. Now you're disoriented. You can't even tell if your hands are sweating from fear or because the walls are coated with something sticky that triggers that response on purpose. That's what makes these traps so brutal. They're not challenging your logic. They're corrupting the data you base your logic on. If your senses are compromised, how can you make any choice with confidence? Some versions of these traps distort time itself, not in reality, but in perception. The lights pulse faster or slower to simulate a change in tempo. Sounds play in loops that stretch or compress your sense of seconds. 5 minutes can feel like 30, or 1. And if you're under pressure, if there's a countdown or a closing window, that warped sense of time becomes a weapon used against you. Others target your equilibrium. Slight shifts in floor angles, vibration patterns that throw off your internal balance. You lean left when you think you're walking straight. You begin to doubt even your own footing. And the moment you hesitate, the trap changes again. Then there are smell and sound combos. One of the cruelest designs uses alternating scents to mimic danger. Burning rubber, rotten meat, then nothing. Then the sweet smell of fruit, then back again. It plays with your survival instincts, making you panic at the wrong times and calm when you should be alert. Sensory misfires like this are exhausting. They drain you. Not because you're doing anything physically difficult, but because your brain is burning power, trying to make sense of a world that doesn't line up. You might even be given a command. Follow the red line, and sure enough, there's a red line on the floor. But then the lighting shifts subtly, and you realize the line is actually blue. It only appeared red under a certain wavelength. And now you don't know if the next line is the same, or if it's a trick layered over a trick. This constant tension between what you think is happening and what's actually happening becomes the real trap. Because once your senses are compromised, your decision-making becomes guesswork. And once you start guessing, the trap no longer needs to outsmart you. It just needs to wait. The worst part. These traps are usually quiet. There's no dramatic reveal, no sudden twist, just a slow erosion of your trust in reality. It happens gradually. A sound that doesn't match your footsteps, a wall that feels closer than it looks, a door that appears open but never gets any nearer, no matter how far you walk. Eventually, your brain starts filling in the blanks. And when it does, The trap doesn't need to confuse you anymore. You'll do it to yourself. You'll hallucinate solutions. Convince yourself something must be there. Act on phantom inputs. That's when the trap has you. Because in a sensory confusion trap, you don't lose because you failed a challenge. You lose because you started to believe a world that wasn't real. Ambiguous pronoun traps. You're in a chamber with two humanoid figures. One of them speaks, the other watches. Then a prompt appears on the wall. They know what you did. That's all it says. No names, no context, just that sentence. And suddenly your brain lights up with questions. Who is they? Do they mean both of them? Just one? Someone else? Or worse, are you supposed to know who they are? This is where the trap begins. Ambiguous pronoun traps are mental chokeholds. They mess with your understanding of who is doing what to whom. And once you misidentify a target or assign blame incorrectly, the trap locks you in. These traps are deceptively simple. They don't require riddles. They don't need moving parts. All they need is one vague reference that your brain rushes to resolve too quickly. Because that's what your brain does. It fills in gaps. It wants resolution. If it sees a sentence like he told him to run, it doesn't want to live in that uncertainty. It wants to figure out who he and him are right now. But in these traps, that instinct is the weakness. The more confident you feel in your assumption, the more likely you are to miss the twist. Imagine this scenario. You find a terminal with a note on the screen. It says, "Give it to her before she finds out." Who is she? And what is it? You might assume it means the woman in the next room. But then again, there was a voice on the intercom earlier that sounded like a woman. Is it her? Or maybe it's referring to the AI system. She called herself mother at one point. And what if it isn't a person at all? What if her refers to a program, a system protocol? One wrong handoff, and you've given access to the wrong entity. These traps work because they exploit the human tendency to anchor meaning quickly. The moment you decide who she is, or what it is, you start acting based on that assumption. And the trap is sitting there, silent, waiting for you to misassign that role. The confusion gets worse when you add multiple layers. A voice says, "He betrayed him because he saw what he did." That's 3 different heads. Or maybe 2. Or maybe one talking about himself. If the trap is asking you to choose who to trust or who to punish based on that sentence, you are now being tested not just on logic, but on your own interpretation of identity. If you hesitate, you fail. If you rush, you probably fail too. That tension, the space between clarity and confusion, is where the trap gets its power. Now let's talk design. These traps are often paired with time pressure. You'll have 30 seconds to decide who you're supposed to help, who you're supposed to stop, and the sentence you're given is short. It says, "Take him out before he warns them." Again, who is him? Who are them? You might think you're stopping a leak, but maybe you just removed the only person trying to help you. These traps are not just puzzles. They're tests of linguistic reflex. Can you slow your mind down enough to not make the obvious assumption? Even more brutal is when the pronouns shift mid-game. One screen tells you she is not to be trusted. Later, another screen says, "Help her escape." You assume it's a different her. But what if it isn't? What if the game changed the goal or changed the meaning of the same pronoun? You trusted the sentence, not the timeline, and now your ally is gone. Sometimes it's not even about people. A prompt might say, "It is the only way," and you think they're referring to the button, but maybe it was the door, or the code, or the silence. The trap never lied. It just let your brain do the damage. To survive these traps, you need to break the autopilot. Every time you see a vague pronoun, he, she, it, they, them, her, pause. Don't ask what it says. Ask what it avoids saying. What is being left out? Who hasn't been named? What does the sentence expect you to assume? Because the moment you start filling in the blanks with certainty, you're not solving the trap anymore. You're walking deeper into it. False dichotomy traps. You step into a circular chamber. There are two levers in front of you. One is red, one is blue. A screen above flashes a sentence, choose wisely. Only one leads to freedom. The other leads to fire. That's it, no hint, no backstory. Just a binary choice staring you in the face. Everything in your body tenses. You feel the pressure building behind your eyes. Your breath shortens. You already know what this is. A classic trap. But what you might not realize yet is that it's not a choice at all. It's a false dichotomy. This is one of the most manipulative traps you'll ever face. Not because it overwhelms you, but because it simplifies you. It cuts away your imagination. It forces your mind into a corner and says pick A or B. And that command, that framing, is the actual trap. False dichotomy traps operate by limiting your options to 2, when in reality, there may be 3, 5, or even 0 valid paths. But once your brain locks into that A or B mode, you stop thinking outside the box. You stop asking the real question, which is, why am I only seeing 2 options? This works because of how our brains crave clarity under stress. When time is limited, when consequences are high, we default to the simplest model. We want clean categories, good or bad, right or wrong, stay or go. But in the world of weird traps, that urge to simplify is exactly what gets used against us. Here's a scenario. You're told, help the man or save the child. The screen blinks red. Time is running out. You rush toward the child. Of course you do. And the trap punishes you. Because the man was holding the detonator. He needed to be stopped. The real choice wasn't binary. It was strategic. It was about the order of actions, not the moral dilemma you were handed. Or maybe you're in a room with 2 buttons. One says trust, the other says doubt, and a voice whispers, pick your truth. You press doubt, thinking this is some kind of psychological twist, but then nothing happens. Why? Because you weren't supposed to pick either. You were supposed to notice the third pressure plate beneath your feet, the one that was triggered the moment you made a choice at all. False dichotomies are devastating because they trap not just your logic, but your identity. The way they're phrased is designed to provoke your ego. Are you brave or are you a coward? Are you loyal or are you selfish? The trap isn't testing your ethics. It's narrowing your perception. It's boxing you into a false narrative where both options are equally wrong or equally meaningless. There's a psychological mechanism behind this. It's called binary framing. Studies in behavioral science show that when people are presented with only 2 labeled options, over 90% choose one of them, even if both are flawed, because we're wired to believe the question itself is valid. If a system asks us to choose A or B, we rarely stop to wonder if there's a C that's just not being shown. Now picture this. You enter a control room. A panel lights up with the question, save yourself or save the others. The trap expects you to weigh lives, to feel guilt, to feel selfishness. But here's the twist. The real exit is a vent behind you, triggered only when you ignore both buttons and walk away. The trap was never about ethics. It was about control. This kind of trap thrives in environments where the framing feels authoritative. If a system, a voice, or a screen presents the dilemma, we treat it as law. We stop challenging the premise. We surrender to the structure. And that surrender, that's where the damage happens. Because the worst part of a false dichotomy trap is not that you lose. It's that you play by someone else's rules and never question whether the game was real in the first place. So how do you escape a trap like this? You learn to pause. When faced with only two options, ask yourself, what's not being shown? What's being implied but not confirmed? You stop treating the question as sacred. You start hunting for the setup. In a room that demands A or B, always ask who benefits from you not seeing C. Because in a false dichotomy trap, the danger isn't just picking the wrong side. It's believing there were only sides to begin with. False analogy traps. You walk into a room with two cages. In one, there's a lion pacing back and forth. In the other, a mechanical dog whirring quietly, its metal tail twitching in sync with a red light on the wall. A voice echoes in the chamber. One of these represents your path forward, the other your destruction. Trust the creature most like you. That sounds logical at first. You're human. You relate to things that feel familiar. The mechanical dog is designed by humans. Maybe you should trust that. But wait, lions are mammals. Biological. Alive. Maybe that's the connection. Maybe that's the clue. And now you're stuck. Not in a zoo, not in a maze, but in a false analogy trap. These traps are deadly not because they lie, but because they seem to make sense. They present you with two things and suggest a connection between them. Then they ask you to act on that comparison. But that connection, it's hollow, misleading, built on emotional or visual resemblance, not functional truth. Here's the core of it. A false analogy takes two unrelated things and says, hey, these are kind of alike, so the rules that apply to one must apply to the other. It's like saying this toaster and this computer both have wires, so they must both be capable of processing data. It's wrong, but it sounds convincing. And in a high-stakes environment where you don't have time to think deeply, you fall for it. Imagine this. There's a sign that reads, just as the eagle flies above danger, so must you rise above this challenge. And nearby is a ladder. Sounds poetic, almost noble. You climb the ladder, feeling clever. But at the top, a pressure plate that triggers the trap. Why? Because you followed symbolism instead of strategy. The analogy sold you a story, not a solution. These traps work especially well on people who crave patterns. People who like to believe that everything has a hidden meaning. And let's be honest, that's most of us. We love metaphors. We love connections. Our brains are wired to spot similarities, but that wiring is exploitable. When the trap presents you with something that feels metaphorically true, you go along with it. Here's another setup. You're told a key and a mind both unlock potential. Use whichever is sharpest. You're presented with two objects, a literal key and a dagger. You pick the key, thinking the analogy is clever. But the real unlock mechanism was voice recognition. The sharpness clue was misdirection. You were chasing the poetry instead of the practicality. False analogy traps often pull in morality or identity. Something like, a wolf protects its pack, so should you. Suddenly, you're identifying with a wolf. You start applying wolf behavior to your own decision. But wolves have an entirely different survival structure. You're not in a forest. You're in a sealed chamber, built to test manipulation. But the analogy made it feel noble, feel real. Sometimes the trap will even give you an example and then dare you to act differently. It'll say, When the candle burns, the moth suffers, but the flame doesn't change. Don't be the moth. So now you avoid the shiny thing in front of you. You take the path that seems dull, safe, dark. But surprise, the shiny object was the exit key. The flame was cold. The analogy wasn't even accurate. It was just persuasive. Here's the real horror of these traps. They don't make you feel tricked. They make you feel smart. That's the hook. You think you solved something. You think you understood the hidden meaning. And it's only after everything crumbles that you realize the meaning was never real. That moment, the one where you realize you've been fooled by your own cleverness. That's the deepest cut. So how do you fight back against this kind of trap? Simple, but not easy. You have to stop treating metaphors like instructions. When you're told A is like B, you ask, in what way? Is the similarity surface level? Emotional? Visual? Does it actually lead to the same outcome? Every analogy wants you to accept the comparison, but in a trap, your survival depends on questioning it. Ask yourself, is this thing being compared based on fact, or is it just a story designed to nudge me? Because in a false analogy trap, the thing that seems like the answer is often just a poetic lie. Conflicting logic traps. You walk into a narrow corridor. There's a message scratched into the wall to go forward. You must go backward. A door ahead is locked. Behind you, a second door you just came through clicks open again. That's already strange. Then a second message lights up above. Only fools return to where they started. Now you're frozen. One message demands backward motion. The other punishes it. Welcome to a conflicting logic trap. This kind of trap doesn't use brute force or fear. It attacks your reasoning. It presents you with a situation where two logical paths contradict each other, but both seem valid. The moment you commit to one, the system slams you for not following the other. It's not about which choice is right. It's about how both choices sabotage each other. The real weapon here is tension, mental tension. You're forced to pick between rules that cancel each other out or make one choice that directly invalidates another. You feel stuck, like every action you take proves you misunderstood something. That's self-doubt. That's spiraling confusion. That's the mechanism. That's the trap itself. Let's say you find a screen that says, the key will only appear when all lights are off. But just above that, a pressure plate labeled activation glows green, and stepping on it turns on every light in the room. You assume it's a sequence puzzle, so you turn off the lights, expecting the key to show. Nothing. You step back on the plate, lights turn back on. Still nothing. You try combinations, timing, order. Eventually, you start wondering, is the key ever real? Are you missing something? Are you supposed to break the system? That confusion isn't the byproduct. It's the feature. These traps are particularly nasty because they don't rely on hidden knowledge. Everything is right there in front of you. Two statements, two paths, both logical, both impossible together. It's the exact opposite of puzzles where you lack information. In conflicting logic traps, you have too much information, but none of it agrees. There's a deeper psychological layer here. Human brains crave consistency. It's actually painful to hold two opposing truths at once. Cognitive dissonance kicks in. You want to resolve the conflict, patch the logic, unify the story. These traps make sure you can't. And the longer you try, the more mental energy you drain trying to force agreement where there is none. Picture this. A recording plays overhead. You are not allowed to wait. Movement is safety. but a panel beneath your feet blinks red every time you shift your weight. Another screen reads remain still. Only the motionless survive. What are you supposed to do? Stay still and get electrocuted. Keep moving and trigger the proximity alarm. You start hesitating. Micro movements. Pauses. That's the real trap. It's trying to overload your decision, making system with two competing rules that both sound like survival instructions. Even language itself becomes a weapon in these traps. You might see a sentence like, "Obey this instruction, disobey the next instruction." Then the next line appears, "Do not obey this." Now you're locked in a self-canceling loop. If you follow the first instruction, you must disobey the second. But if you disobey the second, you're obeying it. And round it goes until you either freeze or break the loop by abandoning the rules entirely. That's the hidden lesson in conflicting logic traps. They want to see if you'll break the frame. Most people won't. Most people stay locked in the logic, trying to resolve it, trying to solve it like it's math. But sometimes the only winning move is to ignore both paths. Step off the grid. Find the ventilation shaft. Speak a command that wasn't offered, because in these traps, resolution is often impossible. Only disruption works. The trap designers know something about you. They know your brain wants closure. So they build systems where closure is the one thing you'll never get. You'll tie yourself in knots trying to make sense of two rules that were never meant to coexist. That's why these traps feel personal. They make you doubt your intelligence. But it's not about being smart. It's about recognizing the trick. So next time you see two rules that seem to contradict each other, ask this: what if neither of them is the real rule? What if the trap is the logic itself? Because in a conflicting logic trap, clarity is bait, and your belief in the system is what seals the cage. Illogical conclusion traps. You're standing in a stone hallway. In front of you, 3 torches flicker on the wall. A sign reads, "When the flame is lit, danger is near." Easy enough. You walk slowly, cautious. As you pass the first torch, nothing happens. Then the second. Still nothing. You reach the third and suddenly it extinguishes. A buzzer sounds. Metal grates slam down behind you. You failed. But why? You go over it in your head. The flame was out. No danger, right? But then you realize the trap didn't care about truth. It cared about how you jumped to your conclusion. This wasn't a puzzle about fire. It was a test of flawed reasoning. A classic illogical conclusion trap. These traps are built to punish assumption. They feed you a statement that sounds reasonable, then flip it just enough to make your logical leap backfire. They're not about what is or isn't true. They're about how you connect the dots, and if the trap can get you to connect the wrong dots for the right reason, it wins. It's a twisted game of logic bait. You're told A leads to B, then shown B, so you assume A must have happened. Seems fair. But here's where the logic breaks. Just because A can cause B doesn't mean A is the only thing that does. That's the trick. These traps abuse causation, correlation, and oversimplification all in one hit. Picture this setup. A screen tells you if the floor glows, the weight is balanced. You step forward. The floor glows. You assume everything's fine. But then the ceiling starts dropping. You panic. Why? Because the glow wasn't about weight. It was rigged. You were told the outcome and given the trigger, but you weren't told what else could cause it. You assumed symmetry. That assumption was the trap. This happens because our brains are wired for fast conclusions. We look for patterns. We fill in gaps. And when something feels right, we don't stop to double, check. That's especially true under pressure. If you're told that every puzzle solved by a green button led to an open door, you start associating green buttons with success. But one room later, you press a green button and get sprayed with knockout gas. You're furious. But the trap never lied. It just let you reach your own conclusion, and then punished you for it. The worst part is, these traps feel personal. They make you question your own logic. They make you wonder how you missed something so obvious. But here's the thing, you didn't miss anything. The trap fed you incomplete information and dared you to treat it like a complete answer. Take another example. A note reads, "Only the guilty knock." You hear footsteps behind a door. You don't knock. The door remains locked. The gas starts to hiss. You're confused. You thought knocking made you suspicious, but that was never stated. You assumed the inverse of the rule, that the innocent should stay silent, and that inverse logic is what doomed you. That's how these traps work. They weaponize implication. They let you draw a conclusion that isn't directly stated, then turn that assumption into your failure point. It's like being handed a riddle that says, "All keys that open doors are silver," then being given a gold key. You think, well, this one must not open anything. But that statement never said silver keys are the only ones that work. You filled in the blank. You drew the box. The trap just watched you step inside it. There's a name for this kind of thinking in logic, affirming the consequent. If A leads to B, people often assume B means A. But that's a fallacy. It's like saying if it's raining, the ground is wet, then seeing wet ground and assuming it must be raining. Maybe someone used a hose. Maybe it rained an hour ago. That little gap in logic is all the trap needs. So how do you escape a trap like this? You slow your brain down. You stop treating the first reasonable answer as the final one. You ask, what else could cause this? What assumptions am I making without realizing it? And most importantly, what's missing from the logic that I'm filling in with my own beliefs? Because in an illogical conclusion trap, it's not about solving what's in front of you. It's about realizing what the trap wants you to believe, and refusing to believe it too easily. That's how you break the loop, not by finding the answer, but by not falling for the wrong one. Overgeneralization traps. You enter a long white corridor with 12 identical doors. Above each one is a sign that says, "The door marked with red leads to danger." Simple enough. You scan the row. 11 signs are black. 1 is red. Obvious choice, right? You stay away from that red one. And just as you're about to open a black, labeled door, the floor gives out. You drop into darkness. Another trap. And the lesson. You trusted the pattern too fast. This is what an overgeneralization trap looks like. It dangles a small truth and dares you to stretch it into a rule. And when you do, the trap closes. At its core, overgeneralization is your brain trying to save time. If one dog bites you, your instincts might whisper that all dogs are dangerous. If 3 riddles in a row used numbers as the answer, you might assume the next one will too. The human mind is always reaching for patterns, even weak ones. That's great for survival in a forest. But in a designed trap, it's a weakness. Here's the twist. The overgeneralization trap doesn't lie to you. It just gives you a few consistent data points and then steps back. It waits for you to connect the dots. You do that on your own, and once you've built a little mental rulebook, the trap flips the logic on its head. Picture this. The first room has a blue tile that opens the door. The second one does too. By the third room, you don't even hesitate. You step on the blue tile confidently, but this time it releases gas. Why? Because you assumed a trend was a rule. You mistook repetition for certainty. The more subtle version of this trap is when you draw conclusions about the entire system from one piece of it. Let's say you find a note that reads, "The leftmost path led to freedom last time." You take that as a strategy, always choose left. But the next time you do, you run into a dead end. Or worse. The original clue was a fact, but you turned it into a strategy. That's where the danger is. This trap gets nastier when it plays into your confidence. You get a few correct guesses. You start trusting your gut. You begin saying things like "it worked before," or "this always happens," or "every time I see this symbol, it means turn right." And once you start saying always or never in your head, the trap knows it's got you. Because in these systems, absolutes are bait. Overgeneralization also preys on fear. If one hallway shocked you, your body remembers. So the next time you see similar lighting, similar flooring, you freeze. But the real danger isn't that fear. It's what your fear makes you assume. You start over, preparing for something that isn't coming, while the real threat comes from the side you ignored, and it gets deeper. Imagine finding a recording that says, "The impatient fail." So now, in every room, you move slowly, deliberately. You hesitate, but the fifth room punishes slowness. The mechanism resets if you're not quick enough. Again, the original clue was true in one context, but you applied it everywhere. You stretched it into a belief, and that belief became the trap. Psychologists call this the representativeness heuristic. Your mind decides something belongs to a category based on surface similarities, not logic. This is useful when deciding whether a fruit is safe to eat or whether an animal is friendly. But in a mental trap, it's a shortcut that skips caution. And that's all the trap needs. So how do you beat it? You question your own certainty. Every time you think you've spotted a rule, you pause and ask, is this really a rule, or just a recent trend? Am I building logic off of repetition, or is there a deeper mechanism I'm missing? And most importantly, am I reacting to this because I've seen it before, or because I actually understand it? Because in overgeneralization traps, your own brain becomes the blueprint for failure. The trap doesn't need to trick you. It just needs to show you 3 examples and let you do the rest. So the next time you find yourself thinking always, never, every time, or just like before, stop, breathe, look again. Maybe this is the one room designed to punish your pattern. Because in these traps, your memory is the lock, and your habit is the key that breaks it. Unsound argument traps. So there's this hallway, dim lighting, polished floors, strange hum in the air. At the end is a machine with a screen. On it, glowing text reads, "All creatures with wings can fly. Bats have wings. Therefore, bats can fly through the scanner." You nod. Makes sense. You step forward, nothing happens. The scanner stays red. Then it flashes a new message. All true statements are safe. This one was not. Warning: invalid conclusion detected. Boom. That's an unsound argument trap. You didn't trip because you misunderstood the rule. You tripped because you accepted the argument structure without checking its foundation. It looked like logic. It smelled like logic. But underneath, the reasoning was broken. See, these traps don't need to give you false information. They just need to give you a statement that looks logical but is based on shaky assumptions or sloppy conclusions. And because the structure feels familiar, this leads to that, therefore this. Your brain nods along and walks right into the trap. Let's break it down. An argument is only sound if it's valid and its premises are true. That means the logic follows correctly, and the starting points are actually real. Unsound arguments might still be valid. The steps make sense, but they start from the wrong place. So you get conclusions that technically work on paper, but fall apart in reality. And that's where the trap waits. Here's a simple example. A screen reads, "Anyone who solves the first puzzle is a genius." You solved the first puzzle. Therefore, you are a genius. Sounds flattering, feels accurate. But what's the trap? The premise that only geniuses solve the first puzzle hasn't been proven. It's just an assertion. And once you believe it, the system can start manipulating you based on that false confidence. This kind of trap feeds on your instinct to agree with things that feel reasonable. You don't want to slow down and dissect every statement, so you lean on shortcuts. If it sounds smart, it must be right. If it feels consistent, it must be true. That's exactly what the trap counts on. Imagine you find a room with 2 buttons. A sign above says, "Pressing the left button opens the door if the system recognizes your presence." The door opens. You press left again in the next room. Nothing. Why? Because the first time, the system recognized you regardless of which button you pressed. The logic seemed to work, but the cause and effect chain was broken. You built your conclusion on faulty premises. Unsound arguments often hide behind clever phrasing. Stuff like, "If we let one person break the rule, soon no one will follow it." Or, "This mechanism failed once, so it cannot be trusted ever again." That's called slippery slope thinking and hasty generalization. The trap weaponizes these to make you act too quickly or hesitate at the worst moment. Sometimes, these arguments sound emotionally correct, like, "If the voice sounds calm, the situation must be safe." But calm voices can lie. Or, "If the room is clean, nothing bad has happened here." But that's an aesthetic judgment, not evidence. The trap knows that your brain often fills in emotional truth where logical proof is missing. There's also the bait of circular reasoning. The trap might say, "You can trust this message because trustworthy messages say so." It loops you. It offers no real proof, just a feel-good echo. And once you accept it, you act based on nothing, which is exactly what the trap wanted. So how do you beat it? You slow your brain down. You stop assuming that structure equals truth. Every time an argument is presented to you, split it apart. Ask yourself, are the starting facts actually facts? Is the conclusion really the only one possible? Or is it just the most convenient one the system wants you to choose? Ask yourself if the logic is pushing you to feel something rather than to think. Is it trying to flatter you, scare you, guilt you? Emotional leverage is a red flag in logic-based traps. The more it wants you to react fast, the more you should pause. Because in unsound argument traps, the real danger isn't the statement. It's the shortcut you take to agree with it. The trap doesn't care what you believe. It only cares how quickly you believe it, and what you do next based on a foundation that was never real to begin with. So next time you hear something that sounds logical, don't just nod along. Tear it apart. Because what feels right might be the step that locks the door behind you. Ambiguous number traps. You walk into a chamber and see a glowing keypad on the wall. Above it, a sign reads the correct number is less than 12. That's it. No context, no scale, no explanation, but the keypad has buttons from 1 through 50. You hesitate. You press 11. Nothing. You try 9. Still nothing. You go all the way down to 1. Suddenly sirens. Ceiling drops half an inch, and a voice says incorrect. You failed the number trap. But wait, wasn't the right number supposed to be less than 12? Exactly. That's the illusion. Ambiguous number traps are nasty. They present a number or a clue that seems clear, seems obvious, but buried inside that clue is a hidden variable. Context, units, scope, assumptions. Something you don't know you're missing. And if you take the number at face value, the trap wins. Here's the problem. Numbers feel concrete. If someone says 3 or 30 or half, your brain relaxes. You feel like you can calculate, estimate, react. But numbers without context are weapons. A number is only useful if you know what it's counting, what it's measuring, what system it belongs to. Otherwise, it's just noise dressed up as data. These traps love to mess with scale. Let's say the puzzle says increase the volume by 5, so you press the button 5 times, but nothing happens. Why? Because the system wasn't using the same scale as you. You assumed it meant 5 clicks. But it meant 5 decibels, or 5%, or 5 units on some alien dial. You weren't wrong. You were just incomplete. And in these traps, incomplete is all it takes to lose. One room might show you a countdown 3 to 1, and then nothing happens. So you go forward, thinking the coast is clear, but the trap wasn't using seconds. It was using beats, or footsteps, or heart pulses, or a completely fake timer meant to bait you into moving too soon. Because the number didn't lie. It just let you assume the unit. Another one, a screen says solve within 10. You panic. 10 what? 10 seconds. 10 moves. 10 thoughts. 10 minutes. And the second you commit to one interpretation, boom, the trap can punish you for not choosing the right one. Even math-based puzzles aren't safe. A sequence like 2, 4, 8, 16 appears. You assume it's doubling. You predict 32, but the next number is 31. Why? Because the pattern wasn't mathematical. It was visual. It was based on the number of letters in the words, not the numbers themselves. These traps thrive on leading you into the wrong type of thinking. Sometimes they even flip expectations based on cultural norms. A note says, the solution is found in the 3rd quarter. You assume that means the 3rd section, but it could mean a fraction, or a date, or even a room labeled Q3. The word third and the word quarter both have multiple meanings, and when numbers mix with language, ambiguity becomes a trapdoor. The real genius of these traps is how fast they hook you. Numbers create a sense of urgency. They create precision, but they also invite overconfidence. You think, oh, I've got this, it's just math. But it's not just math. It's psychological warfare. The number becomes a mirror that reflects your assumptions back at you. The psychological trap here is what's called anchoring. You see a number and your brain locks onto it. You start calculating based on that anchor. Even if the number is random, even if it's wrong, once your brain accepts it as a base point, you're already drifting in the wrong direction. That's what the system wants. It wants you doing the wrong math with full confidence. So how do you escape? You treat every number like a question, not an answer. When a clue gives you a number, your first thought should be, what is this number based on? What are the units? What are the boundaries? Could it be symbolic? Could it be arbitrary? Could it be a trap in disguise? Because the moment you stop assuming numbers are solid is the moment they start losing their power over you. Ambiguous number traps are never really about math. They're about precision without clarity. They give you something that feels exact, and then punish you for not realizing how little you actually know. So next time you see a number glowing in red or ticking down in blue, don't just count. Question everything about it, because in these rooms, numbers lie louder than words. Optical illusion traps. You ever walk into a place and suddenly feel like your brain just hit a wall because what you're seeing makes no sense? Like the floor looks solid, but your gut says it's about to swallow you whole. That's the power of optical illusions messing with your head. And when those illusions become traps, it's not just your brain that gets fooled, it's your entire body. Picture this: you step into a hallway that looks flat, normal, safe. But the second you move, you realize the floor is slanting in a way that throws off your balance, or worse. It's an endless staircase that loops back on itself. Sounds insane, right? But these aren't just weird visuals for fun. Optical illusion traps are designed to make you misjudge space, distance, or even reality, causing you to fall, stumble, or get stuck. And because your brain is wired to trust what your eyes tell you, that makes these traps terrifyingly effective. What's really crazy is how quickly and easily your brain can be fooled. It relies on shortcuts to process everything around you fast, like estimating where the floor ends or how far a step is without thinking. These shortcuts are usually lifesavers, but in the case of illusions, they're the exact reason you get tricked. Take the Ames room, for example, a room shaped so weirdly that people appear to grow or shrink as they move inside it. Now imagine walking through a trap that uses this trick so you misjudge where to step or how far to reach. That's a recipe for disaster. There's also the use of patterns that mess with depth perception, like the checker shadow illusion, where two squares that are actually the same color look totally different because of the way shadows fall on them. A trap using this could hide pressure plates or weak spots on the floor that your brain refuses to see because it thinks it's all safe ground. So you step forward, but the floor gives way. These illusions work because our brains don't process every detail consciously. They fill in gaps to create a quick, coherent picture. But when the picture is deliberately distorted, that trust breaks down. Suddenly, the safe path you're following isn't safe at all. Even more twisted, some illusions can make things disappear from your sight at the worst moments. This is called motion-induced blindness, a weird effect where moving patterns trick your brain into ignoring important objects. Imagine a trap that flashes certain lights or uses moving shapes to hide a deadly spike trap right where you're about to step. You don't see it, so you walk right in. There's also the Penrose stairs illusion, an impossible staircase that loops forever. In real life, a trap designer could use a similar idea to force you to keep climbing, thinking you're making progress, but the stairs actually lead nowhere or collapse beneath you. It's a trap that messes with your sense of direction and wastes your energy while putting you in danger. Lighting and shading play huge roles too. Your brain estimates depth based on shadows, so when those are faked or exaggerated, it's like the ground shifts beneath you. A floor that looks cracked or broken might trick you into stepping around it, but what if that cracked area is actually stable and the surrounding floor is rigged to fall away? That reversal is pure psychological torture. Some optical illusion traps don't just mess with your footing. They can make you dizzy, nauseous, or outright disoriented. Think of those spinning spiral illusions that make your head feel like it's twisting. Crank that effect up, add flickering lights or confusing patterns, and you get a trap that incapacitates you by making your world spin out of control. It's like your senses are being weaponized against you. What's terrifying is these traps don't need to be giant or complicated. A small patch of cleverly painted floor or a few well-placed shadows can be enough to completely throw off your balance and send you crashing. It turns something as simple as walking into a minefield of confusion. After you fall victim to one, you start doubting everything your eyes tell you. Every shadow, every pattern, every step makes you second-guess yourself. And that's exactly what the trap wants. It doesn't just catch you physically, it traps your mind. So next time you think your eyes are foolproof guides through a dangerous space, remember how fragile that trust really is. Optical illusion traps aren't just about physical barriers. They hijack your perception, making the ground shift under your feet and reality twist in ways your brain can't keep up with. And once you realize how easy it is to be fooled, the paranoia kicks in. You start seeing traps everywhere, even where there aren't any. That's the true power of these illusions. They don't just trap your body, they trap your mind. Misleading visual traps. You walk into a silent room. Marble floors, smooth walls. At the center, a giant lever under a spotlight. Behind it, a black door with a glowing green outline. That's it. No puzzles, no clues, just that one lever in the middle of a perfectly lit space. You hesitate for a moment, then walk over and pull it. Instantly, the walls slide apart and reveal 20 more levers, all hidden in shadows. The green door flickers off. Trap triggered. That's how misleading visual traps get you. Not by hiding things in darkness, but by tricking you into focusing on what they want you to see. They don't conceal, they distract. And your own eyes become the mechanism. Your brain is wired to believe what it sees. And even more than that, it's wired to assume that what's clear, central, or visually emphasized is what matters. But these traps flip that instinct against you. They create a spotlight, a focal point, something obvious and loud, something shiny or symmetrical or central. And the second your attention narrows, the rest of the room becomes invisible. There's a psychological principle at play here called inattentional blindness. It means if you're focused hard on one thing, like counting how many times a shape flashes, or tracing a line through a maze, you can miss something massive in plain sight, like a door opening, or a floor shifting, or a timer ticking down behind your head. The trap doesn't need to be hidden. It just needs you to look somewhere else. Let's say a panel shows you 5 glowing symbols. They shift and animate and demand your attention. You stare at them, trying to crack the pattern, but behind you is a small panel slowly dimming. That was the real puzzle. You never even noticed it. Why? Because your visual system was hijacked. These traps often use symmetry and alignment to create false expectations. If there are 4 glowing squares and 3 of them are blue, your brain expects the 4th to be blue too. If one hallway is brightly lit and the other is dim, you're more likely to trust the light. If something is framed perfectly in the center of the room, you assume it's the answer. But sometimes the answer is taped under a bench in the corner, next to the dust. And you never see it because your brain was sure the spotlight meant safety. Even colors are weaponized. A bright green button might seem friendly, a red one dangerous. But in some rooms, red is the exit and green is the reset. Your cultural bias becomes part of the trap. Designers know what colors make you hesitate, which ones make you trust, and they reverse them just enough to mess with your instincts. One particularly brutal trap shows a spinning wheel with flashing numbers. You think it's a countdown, but really, it's just noise. a distraction to keep your eyes busy while a door slowly closes behind a mirror. You were watching the wrong thing, and now the path is gone. Or consider this: a long hallway with blinking tiles. Every few seconds, one turns white. You start to follow them, thinking they're a path. But the sequence is random. The real clue was etched faintly into the floor, visible only from the far side. You trusted movement, color, light, and missed the thing that was static and still. The trap knew what would catch your attention, and it used that against you. So how do you beat this kind of trick? First, stop assuming that what you see is what you get. If something is too obvious, it might be bait. If something is beautiful or symmetrical or glowing just right, treat it with suspicion. Ask yourself, what is this trying to keep me from noticing? Second, take a step back. Literally, change your position in the room. Walk to the edges. Look from a different angle. Crouch. Tilt your head. In misleading visual traps, the truth often only appears when you stop looking straight at it. And most importantly, trust your second glance more than your first. That first impression might be pure illusion, engineered to steer you. But your second glance, the one after your brain cools off, that's where clarity lives. Because in these rooms, your eyes aren't just tools. They're targets. And what you look at first might be the exact thing designed to blind you. Riddle: you step into a stone corridor. Torches flicker. A stone face carved into the wall speaks. I speak without a mouth. I hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with wind. You freeze. You know this. You've heard it before. Echo. It has to be echo. You whisper it out loud. The face smiles. A path opens. You exhale. Relief. But then, the second door seals behind you, and another face appears. This one asks what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening. You blink. That's an ancient one. The answer is man. You speak it. The face nods. Door opens. Now you're starting to feel clever, confident, even proud. But that's exactly what this kind of trap feeds on: your hunger to solve, your rush to feel smart. Because riddle traps aren't always about finding the right answer. Sometimes they're about when you answer, or why, or what you assume the rules are. The third riddle hits harder. I'm tall when I'm young and short when I'm old. You grin. Candle. You say it, nothing happens. You say it again. Silence. The torches flicker once. The room starts to shake. Suddenly you realize, this time it wasn't about the answer. It was about not answering. Because sometimes the trap isn't asking for a solution. It's testing your impulse to respond at all. That's what makes riddle traps so brutal. They come wrapped in charm, in poetry. They sound elegant, enigmatic. But underneath, they're layered with triggers. Some punish you for answering too quickly, some for answering at all. Others wait until you give the right answer, and then flip the rules. In this world, knowing isn't safety, it's bait. Here's what's wild. Your brain is naturally wired to love riddles. There's a real neurological effect called the aha moment. When you solve a puzzle, your brain rewards you with a burst of dopamine. It feels good, really good. That sense of clarity, that snap of understanding, it's addictive. And trap designers know it. So they build entire rooms around that addiction. They hand you just enough mystery to get your gears turning. They craft riddles that sound solvable, even when they're not. Or worse, ones that have multiple answers, but only one is safe. The rest, triggers. Let's say a riddle goes: I am taken from a mine and shut in a wooden case, from which I am never released, and yet I am used by nearly everyone. You think pencil lead. You feel proud. It fits. But you forgot to check your surroundings. You forgot the room you're in is built entirely out of stone. No wood. No mine. The riddle was an echo of the past, not a prompt for now. You answered a historical riddle inside a literal trap. Now it resets, and the walls start to move. And then there are the riddles with built-in misdirection. Like what has hands but cannot clap? You jump straight to clock. Feels right. But what if the correct answer is statue, or mannequin, or worse? None of the answers are wrong, but only one works with the mechanism wired to the door. The trap doesn't care about logic. It cares about the mechanism you trigger when you speak. That's the hidden layer. Some riddle traps respond not to your answer, but to the sound, the number of syllables, the pitch of your voice, or whether you even speak out loud at all. Maybe the correct action was to write your answer in the dust, or to trace it with your finger on the wall. If you assume it's about talking, you lose. So how do you survive this madness? Start by questioning the format. Just because something is shaped like a riddle doesn't mean it functions like one. Look at what else it's doing. Is it stalling for time? Is it drawing you into a specific part of the room? Is it giving you just enough information to create a trap around the answer you think is right? Next, fight the urge to answer immediately. That's the bait. Riddle traps want you to jump. Instead, break it down. Is the riddle speaking metaphorically, literally, visually, or mechanically? Every word might be a trigger. Every silence a test. And remember, sometimes the real answer is to remain silent, or to walk away, or to refuse to play the game. Because the cleverest trap isn't the one that stumps you. It's the one that lets you solve it and punishes you for trying. And just when you think you've figured it out, the riddle changes its tone, starts asking questions that sound personal, deep, maybe even dangerous. But that's a different kind of trap. One where the riddle knows more about you than you do. And that one, well, we'll get there. Wordplay traps. You stare at a sign etched into stone. It reads, "The answer is in the letter." That's it. No envelope, no email. Just the phrase. A keypad blinks underneath. You panic. You think maybe you're missing something. Maybe a scroll or a message or some code. You waste 5 minutes flipping things over, scanning every wall, until finally you realize it was never a letter you were supposed to find. It was the letter itself, like A or B. The clue wasn't physical, it was linguistic. And the moment you realize it, you hear the lock click. Too late. Wordplay traps hit differently. They don't just challenge your logic. They play with how your brain processes language. These puzzles use words that mean more than one thing, or less than they appear to. They twist double meanings, puns, and phrasing into little bombs. And the second you take the bait, the trap is already in motion. The worst part, you don't even realize you're being tricked, because wordplay sounds harmless, clever, even fun. But in a trap environment, it's deadly. Your mind reads something and locks onto the first interpretation. That's called semantic priming. Your brain latches onto the most common or recent meaning of a word. And once you're locked in, you stop questioning. That's exactly what the system wants. Say a clue says you must break the code. You immediately assume it's cryptography, numbers, patterns, ciphers. So you start looking for a substitution key or a Caesar shift. But what if break the code means literally snap a piece of paper labeled code in half, or speak a forbidden phrase that violates the rules, the code of the room? That kind of misdirection feels personal, because you weren't wrong, You were just too fast. Another example. A plaque reads you'll need to draw the line. So you look for a pen, a pencil, something to sketch. But nothing works. The trap isn't asking for artwork. It's waiting for you to make a decision, to draw the line as in take a stand, and once you realize that everything else falls into place. But again, timing is everything. If it takes too long, the room takes you. These traps are ruthless because language itself is flawed. So many words in English carry multiple meanings. Think about this. The word spring can mean a season, a coil, or a sudden movement. Trip can mean a stumble or a journey. Press can mean media or to apply pressure. One word, three meanings, and a trap that knows exactly which one you'll assume first. They even use phonetics against you. A riddle might say the magic word, and you confidently speak please, but nothing happens. Why? Because the magic word was not something polite. It was literally the word magic, or it sounded like it. You were so polite, you missed the pun. Here's another brutal one. A room contains 4 objects: a fan, a match, a book, and a bell. The prompt says, pick what blows your mind. You go for the book, right? Seems metaphorical. But the correct answer is the fan, because it literally blows. And your brain, desperate to be clever, overlooked the simplest answer. These traps aren't just puzzles. They're psychological mirrors. They expose how you think, whether you overthink, underthink, or default to the obvious. They turn your language instincts into liabilities. So how do you survive wordplay traps? First rule, slow down. Rushing to solve the riddle will almost always land you in the wrong meaning. You need to stop and ask yourself, what else could this phrase imply? What's the alternate interpretation? Second, say it out loud. Seriously, speak the clue. Hear how it sounds. Many of these traps use auditory puns, where hearing the phrase actually gives away the twist. Things like "it's not over" or "I see you" make no sense on paper, but reveal everything when spoken. Third, trust the absurd. If a phrase sounds too weird or literal, that might be the exact clue. In these environments, the trap isn't what makes the least sense. It's what makes too much sense too fast. That's where your critical thinking shuts off. And don't get cocky. Even when you've solved a few, the trap will shift tones. One clue might go metaphorical, and the next one deadly literal. Wordplay traps mutate. They evolve based on how you're thinking. Because here, words aren't just tools. They're traps in disguise. And the closer you look, the more dangerous they get. Now imagine a puzzle that combines wordplay with math or direction or movement. That's where things get even more twisted. But we'll get there soon enough. Confusing cause and effect traps. You step into a cold room. A red button pulses softly in the center of the floor. Next to it, a display reads pressing the button floods the chamber. Naturally, you stay away from it. You examine everything else. The door won't budge, the lights dim, and then the floor starts to fill with water anyway. You panic and finally press the button. The water stops, door unlocks. Congratulations. You just fell for one of the nastiest illusions in the trap world, the cause and effect reversal. These traps don't rely on riddles or tricks of the eye. They rely on how your brain builds stories. When you see one thing happen after another, your mind connects them. That's cause and effect. Simple. You touch fire, it burns. You drop a rock, it falls. But what happens when the effect shows up first, or when the true cause is hidden? That's where your instincts betray you. Confusing cause and effect traps twist the entire sequence. They throw you into situations where the consequence comes before the action. Or worse, they let something totally unrelated take credit for what just happened. And your brain, desperate for order, fills in the blanks with a lie. Let's say you flip a switch and a light turns off. Cool, that makes sense. But what you didn't notice is that the light was on a timer. It was going to turn off whether you touched anything or not. You just happened to flip the switch right before it happened. Now you assume that switch controls the light. You build your strategy around it. Next time, you flip it again and nothing happens. Trap activated. Because your brain saw sequence and decided it was cause. There's actually a psychological term for this. It's called post hoc fallacy. It means assuming that if one thing follows another, the first thing must have caused the second. It's the same logic that makes people think their lucky socks won the game, or that sneezing after walking under a ladder is proof of bad luck. It feels real. It feels logical. But it's built on thin air. Trap designers love this. They'll set up scenarios where action A is followed by result B. Just once. Enough to convince you, and then they'll reverse it, or delay it, or make B happen from something else entirely. You pull a lever, hear a door creak open in the distance. You assume the lever caused it. But really, the door was on a motion sensor and only opened because you stepped on the floor tile. But now you're pulling the lever again and again, waiting for something to move. Meanwhile, the floor tile resets and the real trigger stays hidden. It gets even worse when they use misdirection through feedback. For example, you push a button and a green light flashes. So you push it again and again. And each time, the light blinks but nothing else changes. Turns out the light was just a distractor. The real action was triggered by the sequence you were standing in, not the button at all. But your mind saw green light and thought, yes, progress. And here's the part that messes with you the most. These traps feel fair. That's the danger. They don't feel magical or deceptive. They feel logical. They prey on the patterns we're all wired to expect. One thing causes another. Step A leads to step B. But these traps shuffle the sequence, smudge the lines, and wait for you to draw the wrong map in your head. So how do you outsmart them? Start by refusing to trust timing alone. Just because something happened after your action doesn't mean your action made it happen. Look for confirmation. Look for consistency. If it only worked once and never again, you're probably looking at a coincidence, not a mechanism. Next, isolate variables. Try the same action in a different order, or while standing somewhere else, or without touching anything else nearby. The fewer moving parts you involve, the easier it is to see what actually matters. And always consider the invisible factor. Was there a sensor? A timer? Something that would have triggered the event no matter what? If you can't answer that, you're guessing. And in a room like this, guessing is just a countdown to failure. Because confusing cause and effect traps don't need to hide. They just need you to draw the wrong conclusion. Once they plant the seed, you do the rest. You build the logic. You act on it. You trap yourself. And just when you think you've figured it out, the trap flips again. Cause becomes effect. Effect becomes bait, and you realize the only thing you can trust is what doesn't make sense. Yet,